Hi Rajiv, how are you?
I'm good, sir. I'm good, sir. Welcome.
Hi Sandeep bhai.
अरे लक्ष्य कैसे हो?
एकदम बढ़िया. How are you sir?
और चल रहा वॉलेटाइल मार्केट्स
I know. ऊपर नीचे है.
हमारे को राजीव ने यहाँ बुलाया हुआ, देखो मार्केट्स में भगाने के लिए. So अभी राजीव
Please start.
start.
We'll start. Yes.
So what?
Mr. Sundeep Sikka, Chairman CII Mutual Fund Summit, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer, Nippon Life India Asset Management Limited. Mr. Nilesh Shah, Chairman CII National Committee on Financial Markets, Chairman MFI, Group President and Managing Director, Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company Limited. Shri N. Damodaran, Chairperson, Excellence in Ebro Private Limited. Former Chairman, SEBI, UTI and IDBI. CII Mutual Fund Advisory Board members, thought leaders from the sector, and friends from the fraternity are very welcome all to the 15th edition of CII Mutual Fund Summit. With the theme, the next summit, Journey of Inclusive and Responsible Growth. We thank you everyone out here for joining us and taking out their valuable time. We are very happy to see our overwhelming response from everyone with around 600 people attending from the live platform, and the summit is live on YouTube. With this note, let me take this opportunity to call Mr. Nilesh Shah to open the summit with his opening remark. Mr. Shah.
Thank you Rajiv. Mr. Sundeep Sikka, Chairman CII Mutual Fund Summit. Sri Mr. M. Damodaran, Chairman Excellence Enablers Private Limited and former Chairman SEBI, UTI and IDBI. Distinguished guests, friends from the fraternity, CII members, eminent speakers and participants. Good afternoon and very warm welcome to all of you. It is a pleasure to be part of the 15th edition of CII Mutual Fund Summit. I take this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guests and to the members of the audience who have taken time out of their busy schedule to participate in this initiative. On behalf of CII and myself, I extend a very warm welcome to Sri M. Damodaran, Chairman Excellence Enablers Private Limited and former Chairman SEBI, UTI and IDBI. It is our pleasure to have your kind presence at this virtual summit today, and we look forward to your wise words and continued guidance as always in our future endeavors. It is also my pleasure to welcome the Chairman of the Summit, Mr. Sundeep Sikka, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer, Nippon Life India Asset Management. Sundeep has driven this summit with great zeal and passion. I must congratulate you, Sundeep, for dwelling into much pertinent topic of inclusion and technology adoption in the mutual fund and asset management sector. It's a major turning point for the industry today as it rises back from the pandemic crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the 15th edition of the CII Mutual Fund Summit, a flagship initiative by the Confederation of Indian Industry. Over the years, this summit has garnered attention as the annual meeting of India's leading asset management companies, asset managers, fund administrators, and fund selectors. This annual event has covered industry leaders and government regulators to share, analyze, and debate on the most pressing industry aspects and to create a sustainable ecosystem for the Indian mutual fund industry. I would like to especially thank here the advisory panel members, Boston Consulting Group and SEBI, who have worked with CII Secretariat and given their valuable inputs to shape today's program agenda and make this summit a grand success. As we complete a year with pandemic and move into 2021, we also carry ahead the optimism of an economy which is rebounding fast and a bounce back of a stable financial market. The regulators, the policymakers, the government, and the industry have worked together to create V-shaped economic recovery. The mutual fund industry too has seen a large rate of growth over the last 2 decades with spectacular CAGR of 18%. the AUM in India has grown fourfold in last decade and aims at a fourfold growth, along with 3 times growth in the investor account to about 13 crore by the year 2025. India's AUM to GDP ratio at 12% is somewhere near to what is China in terms of AUM to GDP ratio at 13%. However, when we look at Western countries, we are significantly below in terms of penetration of mutual fund. Clearly, mutual funds have done well if we look at the past, but we have barely scratched the surface as we look at forward. Today, there is debate about value addition by fund managers as alpha generation has come down over the years. If we don't add value to our customers, there is no reason for us to exist. How do fund managers navigate this volatile market and continue to generate alpha like before will be one big challenge faced by the industry. Second, how do we bring economies of scale to investors? Clearly, in the past, mutual funds were more physical in nature, though they were making rapid strides towards digitization. COVID-19 suddenly accelerated all digitization plan, and I'm happy to state that all the mutual funds during pandemic continued to provide service to the investors uninterruptedly. How do we bring digitization along with physical existence in lowering cost of transactions to the customers? How do we ensure that mutual funds continue to lead digitization in terms of convenience, in terms of cost to the investors? Finally, today, when I look at more than 2.25 crore customers of mutual fund or more than 9 crore folios of mutual fund, we are more targeted, we are more inclined towards HNIs, upper middle class, and urban India. How do we transit to lower middle income group and bottom of the pyramid? How do we move to rural India? How do we expand our network will determine success of mutual fund. Clearly, when we look at past, we have done a great job, but when we look at potential, we have barely scratched the surface. I look forward to discussion in today's summit, which lays roadmap for mutual fund to move ahead, and it continues to do a great job in managing money for customers, in managing investors' trust and confidence in this volatile time period, and maintaining highest standards of ethics in managing public money. Wish you all a great summit. Thank you. Over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. May I request Mr. Sundeep Sikka to give away the welcome remarks?
Thanks, Rajiv. Thanks, Nilesh. Distinguished colleagues from the industry, guests at the opening session, friends from the mutual fund industry, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome and a good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to address this august gathering today. It's a privilege to welcome Shri M. Damodaran, former chairman SEBI and the chairperson of Excellence Enablers Private Limited, to the 15th edition of CII Mutual Fund Summit. We are honored to have you address us today again, and we look forward to have your insightful comments on the mutual fund industry. Once again, thank you very much, sir. I also extend a warm welcome to my friend, colleague, Mr. Nilesh Shah, Chairman CII National Committee on Financial Markets and Chairman AMFI, who has shared his thoughts in the opening session. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here at the 15th edition of CII Mutual Fund Summit. It is truly a magnificent journey for the industry as a whole over the years. CII has seen the industry mature, grow, and it has provided a strong platform to the industry stakeholders like regulators, fund houses, distributors to come together and debate over the current industry issues and address key challenges to identify, implement solutions, and present it to the government bodies and regulators. It would not have been possible without the participation of all of you, and I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all once again to this edition that is run virtually amidst the crisis that we are currently facing. CII has always believed in working as a catalyst between industry, regulatory bodies, government to address the ongoing concern of the stakeholders. Therefore, it is important we bring the opportunities and challenges of the industry in open forum like today, brainstorm for a constructive approach for the benefit of the industry. I would like to briefly touch upon three main points today. First, I'm proud to see mutual fund industry has weathered the COVID impact quite well. Despite lockdown impact, there wasn't a single day's stoppage in the mutual fund redemptions. The AMC operations ran perfectly well online, even when there was a complete lockdown. There was also a marked improvement in the operations compared to 2008 crisis, and investors made full use of the digital avenues of investments as well. On back of buoyant markets, we also saw AUM bounce back from a low of 22 lakhs crores in March 2020 to 30 lakhs in Jan 21, up 37%. Apart from COVID, the industry this year faced the impact of credit crisis in NBFC sector. This especially brought to light the need of stronger risk management practices that could help combat such scenarios in future. In these challenging times, it is easy to lose sight of the bigger picture, which brings me to the second point. We must remember our industry not only helps to create long-term wealth but supports the economy through active participation in capital markets. In just 3 years, we have witnessed a net inflow of 4.4 lakh crores, of which 1.4 lakh crores has been in equity. Our SIP contributions in FY21 alone were nearly 80,000 crores. I'm happy to see the continued adoption of SIP with nearly 4 lakh crores of accumulated AUM under SIPs this year. Lastly, I would like to point out the growing need of digital solutions in the industry. This has been of particular importance during the lockdown, and as all stakeholders of the industry benefited from it. As the finance and the tech worlds collide, there will be opportunities and threats in unexpected forms. It is up to us to stay one step ahead and bring about the position of from the disruption that is happening, make it as an opportunity for us in this industry. With the wide potential present in B30 locations, we have a unique proposition to use technology for strengthening reach for our distribution partners, improving risk and investment management process, reshape our transaction flow, and innovate new products. We all firmly believe there is a huge untapped potential in the Indian asset management industry, and with the utmost certainty, we can say industry is headed towards a positive growth trajectory. After almost a year of 2020, which a lot of people would say may not be the best year, but I think mutual fund industry has come out very strong out of it. Moving past the impact of lockdown, Indian GDP posted a marginal positive growth in Q3. Research S&P Global suggests our economy could grow at 10% in FY22 and keeping pace with the emerging economies. As our economy gets back on track, mutual fund industry will see faster levels of growth. As Mr. Nilesh mentioned, our AUM to GDP ratio is still about 12 to 13%, which is much lower than the world average of 63%. Economic and social disruptions and subsequent lockdowns have seen unforeseen challenges, fresh perspectives and new opportunities for Indian mutual fund industry. As the market bounced back, industry crossovers to an optimistic sentiment through an evolved digital and technological ecosystem, non-traditional investment products increased access to the growing investor base, thereby building a future-fit industry to respond to the imminent market disruptions. It is crucial that we reimagine our future strategies against the backdrop of these catalysts. Moving forward, we have the day ahead of us filled with discussion on various topics. It gives me immense pleasure to lead the CII Mutual Fund Summit in its 15th edition. CII Mutual Fund Summit is an annual initiative that has been the voice of the mutual fund industry and investor community for the last 15 years. It has been an utmost pleasure to plan this edition of Summit, reflecting on virtual stage, I should say, that the industry has reached today, celebrating the success and learning from the failures, along with the Mutual Fund Advisory Forum members and PCG. As the industry ensures to rebound after COVID-19 crisis by identifying pockets of growth, it is vital that we invest in building the infrastructure of future while innovating and working on the new product landscape, redefining customer experience with the digital touch and optimizing cost. With this background, we present this year's summit theme, the journey of inclusion and responsible growth. The summit focuses on various sections like new growth spots, product innovation, distribution infrastructure, financial inclusion, customer service, and innovation and technology. Through this half-day summit, we intend to have a discussion on the key challenges and themes identified by the regulator and knowledge partners that the industry is facing and how we can effectively collaborate to build required solutions for the future growth. In the first CEO panel session, we talk about inclusion as the growth imperative, and we'll discuss the huge underlying potential of the low income segments, markets beyond 30, deeper penetration into saving wallet. As we say, there is a Dharavi in every city. The idea is to go not only deep into the smaller cities, but also deep into the bigger cities. Thereafter, a panel discussion on digital and technology in mutual funds will highlight how the industry takes advantage of the good starting position to be the trendsetter in technology adoption. How do we increase digital direct business by leveraging tools of analytics? We proceed towards the next session, embedding tighter compliance and risk management while balancing growth, which will cover AMCs, how AMCs should think, identify, assess, and mitigate risk. The concluding session focuses on setting gold standards for investment performance and talks about how the industry ensures sustainability of performance. Like last year, this year too, we have the privilege of having amongst us eminent speakers who have been kind enough to participate with us and share the perspective of the industry in this session. I hope the discussion of this summit will prove beneficial in addressing the range of issues affecting the growth of the sector and economy. I would once again like to thank all stakeholders who have worked with CII and given the valuable inputs for this summit and making it this possible edition. I encourage all participants to ideate, connect, consider ways to improve the innovative capacity and capability of our industry and be a part of this growing community of investors who are going to be supporting not only the mutual fund industry, but also the nation. With this, I would like to end my address. I wish everyone a productive, insightful summit. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Shri M. Damodaran, former SEBI chairman, for his address. Thank you.
Sundeep Sikka, Mr. Nilesh Shah, Rajiv Mishra, and friends from the mutual fund industry. Thank you, Sundeep, for inviting me yet again. You mentioned that you were inviting me back here. I sometimes get the impression that people might think he's turned up like a bad penny. So just to set the record straight, I'm delighted to be here, delighted that I was invited, delighted to be associated with a summit that looks at a subject that is very, very close to my heart. And I want to focus on two words in your theme, inclusive and responsible. Because to my mind, growth is not growth if it's not inclusive. A small segment of society grows. That is not sustainable growth. That is growth that sets in motion tensions, frictions, and every avoidable negative relationship which could stress the systems, on occasion break the system. It's necessary to carry everyone on this journey. And that is why I think your focus on inclusive growth is very apt. Equally, growth cannot be irresponsible. There are ways and ways, not just in the mutual fund industry, but elsewhere. If you look at short-termism, if can abandon the high road of morality, take shortcuts, resort to expediency, have growth, but that growth will not be sustainable. That growth will have its pain points both along the way, arrive at whatever destination you arrive at. And therefore, let me compliment you for putting your finger on the spot, for identifying the right theme, contextually relevant, and the basis on which all growth must necessarily take place. I took away a few important points from both what Mr. Nilesh Shah said as well as your presidential address. Nilesh Shah took the words out of my mouth. Of course, he put it much better. He can always put it better than I can. When he said that the focus has been on HNI, upper middle class, and urban India. So it's useful to ask yourself, not in a mood of denial, because the easiest response I find these days when somebody is pushed back is a three-stage response, which is deny, defy, and then decry. Decry the guy who makes the suggestion or whatever. So if you avoid that attitude, introspect individually, collectively, etc., I think you'll realize that ever since the Unit Trust of India was set up on the basis of a statute of 1963, till now, there has been less than proportionate presence, for whatever reason, of the small guy. Now, what that could translate to, if some people take serious notice, is that you will get another set of prescriptions which will then impede growth, push you back, and it will be a solution that won't help anybody, but will certainly hurt the larger cause of the industry. So I think you ought to put on your thinking caps and decide how to reach the target that is beyond HNIs, beyond upper middle class, and beyond urban India. I heard it said that you only scratched the surface in spite of fairly impressive growth over the last 2 decades, and that it is nowhere near its potential. I think it's important for individuals and institutions to clearly identify potential and work towards that on a journey that is based on values, principles, and as I mentioned earlier, is a sustainable journey, a growth journey that you can sustain. It cannot be that you sprint at some level, go to sleep along the way, and then never ever get to where you wanted to get. Clearly, and the numbers have been already mentioned, I will not repeat it. Clearly, the industry is nowhere than where it wants to be. And in my individual conversations with people in the industry, I get to hear this again and again. No, we are not happy. We would have loved to be not just much bigger, but to have a really pan-India presence to connect not just with India, but with Bharat also. And that is something that has been started courtesy technology. And when you look at technology, the drive towards being digital, giving digital solutions. I'm reminded of the WhatsApp joke, which is who promoted the digital journey in 2020? Was it the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, or COVID? And no prizes for guessing what most people responded with. So, I mean, that is an opportunity that everyone grabbed. You reached to customers, but technology ought to be at the base of every effort that you make going forward, COVID or no COVID. You cannot afford to let up on this. And connected with technology is the transparency that it is. We cannot in this day and age afford to be opaque in what we do. If we are taking money from people on the promise that we will grow that and make them a little wealthier than they were when they actually signed up, there is a responsibility to be transparent. There is a responsibility for them to understand and identify with the steps that you're taking, even if the understanding is limited because they're not finance professionals, for them to see that there is no disconnect between word and deed, between what you promised and what you're doing, and not in terms of returns. Returns are based on several things, all of which is not in your hands. It's a good story that the economy now has that I heard a statement of the finance minister a couple of weeks ago where she said, the new normal is going to be better than the pre-COVID normal. And I believe looking at some instances that have been trotted out, some numbers, some growth stories, that might well be the case. We all normal is something that we were a little afraid of, suboptimal, not able to recover the ground that we lost during COVID, and yet the new normal has possibilities. And this is into those possibilities, that growth story that the industry must buy and have the relevant products. I want to, for old time's sake, I'm an old timer and an old UTI hand, as many of you know, to read out to you the first part of the preamble of the UTI Act 1963. It's relevant in this day and age when you talk of inclusive and responsible growth. It says an act corporate with a view to encouraging saving and investment and participation in the income, profit, and gains, etc. Now, before the UTI was set up, savings were not very good. Hoarding and saving were looked at as identical. The favored asset classes were gold and estate. I'm not gone out of fashion, they still are in fashion. But there was a need to collect the money, the investable surpluses from all parts of India and to plow it through the mutual funds into the growth story of India. And that is the basis on which the Unit Trust of India was set up. That I imagine is the basis on which the subsequent pure MFs, UTI was not a pure MF, it was an investment institution at one level. The MFs that came later, much later, both in the public and the private sectors, definitely were the entry level vehicle, which is what it was intended to be for, especially for first time investors getting into the markets, looking at equity as an asset class, for example, a little afraid because of the failures that they'd heard about, the neighbors that lost money, family members that lost, and yet they needed to diversify, to move away from bank deposits, which if you factor in inflation and taxes, were not giving you any returns at all, and to put it in a place where there was some return that was available on a continuing basis. And that is why they channelized a part, a small part, and we're all unhappy with the amount that the market has been able to attract as compared to the other asset classes. And within that, the mutual fund industry. I have always believed that for the first time investor, this is the entry vehicle. You have several things to commend you, but especially of the diversification that a larger fund can have as opposed to an individual investor's relatively small savings, and the benefit of research and the value add that goes into the decisions that people. Now, has all of that been justified? It's useful to ask that and not search for an answer. Because the minute you search for an answer, then you will get some uncomfortable questions, not across the industry, but maybe at different levels. And I want to touch on two or three other things. To my mind, I mentioned technology, I mentioned transparency. It is the three T's really. And I am, like many of you, a tea drinker, and at least a lot of importance on tea. There is a letter T of the drink. Transparency, technology, and trust. Trust is critical. Trust not just two sets of people trusting each other, not the, let's say, the people that invest trusting the fund managers, trust between the industry and the regulator, for example. Should you always operate in a situation of distrust where a regulator believes if I do not put in place very strict restrictions, these guys will go haywire. And therefore, I need to do something to see that they act strictly within the framework of what I wanted. There have been failures. There have been delayed responses from the regulator. Frankly, I was a little surprised that in a recent case it took this long. I said frankly, LY, so don't get me wrong. You must get the spelling right. I was a little surprised because with all the criticism that was out there in the market, the regulator must have, I'm sure they were doing something, but for the public to know, yes, we are on top of this, would have been a very comforting exercise. I believe that regulator and industry, especially your industry, need to have a continuing and constructive conversation on the basis of which you can write regulations which can stay the course, at least for a few years. Now, the minute you start tweaking regulations, which is an episodic response that regulators worldwide have, something goes wrong somewhere, therefore you write a new regulation, it's not the answer. So that can be changed only if there is a continuing conversation, open conversation, a constructive conversation where you together agree what needs to be done. Now, if the Prime Minister can say that what you need is minimum government, maximum governance, I think you can interpret it to say minimum regulations, maximum regulation. You write less, but you enforce more what you have. Don't write afresh every time. That's been some problem that I have always had. And now from 63, 64 till now, what has been the one dominant theme? Products have got more complex, catering to the people that Nilesh spoke about. Procedures regulation. The combination of increasing complexity of products and processes is going to do nobody good. So just trying to take a deep breath, look back at what is on the table and ask yourselves, let's forget the regulator for a moment. How can we as an industry fix our problem? If you look back at the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, there was a lot of criticism, a lot of pushback. And when that happened, one of the former regulators of the SEC made a very interesting comment. He said, industry made mistakes. Industry knew they made mistakes. Industry did not respond to that knowledge. And therefore, somebody had to move in and write out a law. So don't invite external additional prescriptive arrangements because you thought this is not something we need to do. Visit it from an old. The other thought I wanted to share with you is a lot of talk now about, passive investments being better, index products are better, fund manager activism can be taken out of the equation, and all of that. And if you look at the journey that the Sensex or the Nifty has had over the last not so long ago, many people will believe that after all the Sensex went above 50,000. Possibly I didn't look at it today, maybe it's staying from there in reasonably quick time. So if somebody had just bet on the indices rather than individual stocks or mutual funds, actively managed schemes, perhaps the returns might have been higher. But that will be the death knell of the industry. You do want actively managed schemes. But when activism translates to adventurism, and it's not just the mutual fund industry, you have actually situations all over, and I say this even with the judiciary. Judicial activism translating to judicial adventurism. That is a negative thing. So it is for you to first look at it and then say, and now to the point that I really wanted to share with you. So if trust is at the base of the equation, look at the role of the trustees. I think trustees and several of my friends, I hope they're still my friends after hearing what I have to say. Several of them are trustees. I don't think they've done a good job collectively. It's not enough if in the trustee meetings you grilled the AMC people, asked them the tough questions. What did you do after that? Yeah, sometimes, no, our trustees ask tough questions. After that, what? It's like the football team taking the ball up to the penalty box. Have you scored? You haven't scored. So no matter your fancy dribbles might take you to the penalty box, but till you convert that to something that's on the scoreboard, it doesn't help. And trustees shouldn't be acting in that fashion. Trustees should really hammer the point home if they see something's going wrong. Every mistake that catches the attention of the regulator is a mistake that has gone past the trustees. Whether they did not notice it or noticed but did not do anything, that is what goes to the regulator, which means a big mistake has occurred. So trustees are the custodians of the trust of the investors. They are the conscience keepers of your industry. They don't measure up. Then there would be issues because the expectations are high. I would urge that the AMC people among you must get more out of your trustees. Get them to ask you the tough questions. I say this to all audit committees. Get the auditors to ask you the tough questions. Peaceful coexistence is not the answer on a long-term basis. Peaceful coexistence is very good at a personal level, outside of the boardroom. But otherwise, there must be tough conversations if there are issues that are surfacing. The very last point I wanted to make is communications. I think you communicate much better today with investors than in the past. The communications are more frequent. The communications carry far more information. But it's useful to ask ourselves sometimes, are we communicating enough? The test, the acid test really is read all those communications that you send out by putting yourselves in the shoes of the reader and asking you yourself, am I getting to hear or see or read something that is clear to my mind? And mind you, going back to the HNI conversation, it's not for them to read and understand. You have to communicate to that small guy that needs to understand. Otherwise, they will sign off, and the information asymmetry that exists in the industry between the big boys that are investors and the small people, the fill it, forget it types, those who in the earlier days filled forms and forgot about it till somebody reminded them that they had an investment in a mutual fund. That information gap has to be bridged. So communications ought to be simpler. Communications must actually communicate. It seems tautological to say this, but sometimes communications don't communicate. They do everything else. Because they're written in a manner where communication is the least of the objectives. Thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. It's always a pleasure to be here. My journey in this industry started, as mentioned, 3 years ago in 2001, the middle of 2001. It was a little under 20 years when I first was with luckily no prior notice, no baggage of being an investor, nothing of that kind. So I was able to write on a clean slate, not have to clear cobwebs because there were none at that stage. The industry has certainly moved very well. All credit to all of you. Your products are good products. They've delivered returns. But please keep that small man in your mind. And somewhere long after this summit is over, maybe it's useful to keep under your tabletop, under the glass, just the theme of this conference, the journey of inclusive and responsible growth. So that every time people in charge of the AMCs look at that, maybe you will be striking a blow for the small anonymous man somewhere out there. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. On behalf of CII, I thank Mr. Damodaran for sharing his perspective and delivering an insightful address. Sir, you mentioned 20 years back, you were airdropped into this industry. I think I personally feel, while you've been out of the industry for some time, but it's such insightful to hear your passion and the learnings for each one of us. Every time we meet you, last time we got an opportunity to meet you in person for the summit, but I think I should thank you for sharing your experience every year with us. I want to also thank the CII Western Region Secretariat and the CII members, along with the industry, who are attending the virtual summit today. Special thanks to Mr. Nilesh for agreeing to participate in the summit. Sir, some of the great takeaways from what you shared and what Nilesh shared. I think one, I'm very happy you like the topic, the theme of this conference. But the word that you talked about, T, trust, transparency, and technology, that is going to be the most important thing for us to take things forward. This industry over the last 20 years, while we initially focused a lot on HNI, but has been moving more and more retail, but this is going to be a journey and it will continue. And with the entire industry focused to make it as retail as possible, I'm sure the day is not far away when every Indian household will be a mutual fund investor. At last, I want to also take this opportunity to thank all our guests in the opening session, and special thanks to the advisory board for this mutual fund summit. I want to thank Mr. Vijay Chandok, Neeraj Choksi, Mr. Dhruv Mehta, Ravi Menon, Sharad, and Nitin Kamath. And also want to thank the team at BCG for all your support and help. We have a very interesting day ahead with few engaging panel sessions with eminent speakers and visionary leaders lined up for next. We will start the evening proceedings in a few minutes from now. Once again, thank you, sir, and thank you, Nilesh.
Thank you, Mr. Sikka. Thank you, Mr. Shah, and thank you. This was a really insightful, thoughts on the going forward and talking on the inclusive and responsible growth. Thank you so much. On that note, we'll start with our next panel discussion on inclusion as the growth imperative. And let me call Mr. Ashish Garg, Managing Director and Senior Partner, Boston Consulting Group. Ashish, you can take it ahead from here.
Ashish, you are on mute.
Am I audible? Am I audible? Thank you. Yeah. Just want to make sure that all the esteemed panelists are there. We are slightly ahead of time. So I can see Mr. Rahman. I can see Sharad.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi.
Let's see if Neeraj is around. Hi, Neeraj. Are you able to listen? And is Dhruv around? Hi, Dhruv.
Yeah, hi.
All right. Thank you very much for joining. It's really heartening and fascinating to hear industry leaders, and I think Mr. Damodaran has really set the stage for this panel, which is all about inclusive growth. We really been having a dream run, and we have been growing in leaps and bounds, and it is actually our responsibility to take every citizen, every possible investor out there along with us. Before I make some opening remarks, let me just introduce a very, very esteemed panel that we have today with us. Mr. Rahman is the Chief Executive Officer of UTI, been associated with the UTI Group for over 2 decades, has a wealth of experience in variety of roles and has built probably the institution. And UTI is very special for this panel, given the amount of initiatives they have taken to really further the cause of inclusion. He serves on various boards and various high-level committees constituted by government and SEBI. Welcome, Mr. Rahman.
Thank you.
Sharad is the country head retail banking for Citibank India. Sharad has been serving this position for a while now. He brings a very different perspective, having served Citibank in various roles in various geographies. including being the Chief Operating Officer and Head of Sales and Distribution, including for wealth management and as Head of Citigold. He's an innovator par excellence and has launched many significant initiatives for Citibank, which has made inclusive banking a possibility, and would love to hear his thoughts on how to take some of these ideas further into mutual funds. Welcome, Sharat. The third guest on the panel is Neeraj. Neeraj needs no introduction. Being a pioneer in the industry, probably ahead of time, started NJ India Invest in 1994 and has been engaged in distribution of mutual funds. It's one of the largest mutual fund distributor companies in India. But apart from being distributors of mutual fund, I think the model they have developed and just broadened the reach through their IFA model or support to IFA model has been a cornerstone. He serves on various committees across platforms, and again, with a wealth of experience and knowledge, it'll be great to hear Neeraj. Welcome, Neeraj. And final guest on our panel is Dhruv. Dhruv is a CA and a cost accountant. I think he has probably one of the most diverse experiences amongst our panelists. He has served as a consultant. He has served in various industries. And then since 2003, he has been very formally associated with mutual fund wealth management industry, creating various kind of organizations. Today, he manages one of the largest portfolios in the country, as well as is a very respected advisor to various bodies and various other industry forums. Welcome, Dhruv. Thank you. Look, we are in very exciting times. Of course, growth always primes us. We can talk about ratios. What is the AUM to GDP ratio? What is the number of accounts that we have opened up? How the SIPs have been broadening up. It's really something that gives us a fantastic boost. But I think what we must not miss is actually, the road ahead could even be more exciting. India's financial infrastructure is probably one of the best in the country. In terms of the various layers that are being put out, some of the more complex financial products, including banking products, are being made far more simpler today, which has also meant the cost of doing business, the cost of acquisition is all coming down. It's the kind of regime that you see, the way we think about how the interest rates are being spoken about in the country. If you look at some of the budget proposals, we would think that mutual funds has to become more and more mainstay for even our, for very average investors, for very small ticket investors. And it's not really an industry for only the HNI. So I would say, while we had a fantastic run in the last 2 decades, but it feels to me that it is just the beginning. The whole, platforms that are coming on, for example, on account aggregators, the way bank accounts have really penetrated each and every individual in the country, household in the country. I can only feel the excitement and the pinch here. With that, let's get into our panel discussion. The way we will run our panel discussion is I am going to pose a question to each of our panelists. I will request the panelists to whom I pose a question to kind of elaborate on that question in detail, speaking about the experiences, pointers that industry can pick up. And from there, all the other panelists can kind of add on their points to that. So we'll do a little bit of a round robin. On the chat box, please feel free to ask questions or comments as we go along. Mr. Rahman, my first question is to you. One would argue that, regulator has always been very supportive when it comes to how we should be thinking about various issues. We have taken various issues to them, and there has been a very nice, we have always got a nice hearing from them. So for example, one of the interventions that came up way back in, I think, 2013 was higher commissions in B30 were allowed to promote and facilitate inclusion and small ticket sales. UTI has a towering presence and brand across the country, but more so in B30. We would love to hear from you, your experience with distributors and investors from B30. Are they really that different? Are they really the same? And where I'm coming from is, do we need to rethink about the whole B30 as a separate category in today's time, or actually it is still as relevant as it was a few years back? Mr. Rahman.
Thank you, Ashish, for a wonderful introduction. But you probably may not be knowing, in this panel, I'm the only person who is less than 60 but still got vaccinated. I got my vaccine yesterday for COVID-19. So this is one more point which I wanted to add to my colleagues. The same Mr. Damodaran was my boss when UTI was bifurcated, and he has just spoken about the industry. And very important point which he mentioned is about the existence of UTI. Why UTI came into existence? The purpose was to channelize the saving of small investors into the capital market. Where from these small investors come? They basically come from the B30 cities. So Ashish and other friends, my distinguished colleagues on this panel, basically we need to go back when the exit load or entry load was removed. And there are a lot of tension in the market, particularly with the distributors. But good news is, after Mr. Damodaran had managed the asset management business, and immediately after that, the issue came about when the entry load was removed, and the industry faced a tremendous amount of tension. Then Mr. Sinha became the CII chairman, and I have a fortune to serve both of these great individuals. So when Mr. Sinha was the chairman of CII at a particular point of time, in consultation with IMFI, our trade body, a new concept was introduced beyond 15 cities. So the entire geography was divided in two groups, and beyond 15 cities. A new commission structure was introduced. And in 2018, this was further elaborated. A new segment came up beyond 30 cities. A new incentive scheme was basically rolled out. And in our business, there are mainly four stakeholders: regulator, and they are the great enabler. I take this opportunity to thank our regulator to be very proactive and supportive to take our business forward. Then the asset management company. The incentive structure which SEBI allowed us to roll out helped us to pass it on to the distributors. And we witnessed that distributors was basically struggling to meet the cost of acquisitions. And with the new concept, we passed on mostly this extra commissions to distributors. And that has helped distributors to mobilize more and more investors. This incentive scheme or these regulations really motivated all of us as an asset manager to compensate better our distributors, and they were in a position to garner better and better business. Ashish, the benefit of this incentive scheme was, or which data speaks for itself, during this period between December 2012 to December 2020, in the top 30 cities, the AUM grew by 2.3x. But beyond 30 cities, during this corresponding period, AUM grew by almost 12x. Another important data to share with you is the contribution of fixed deposit to the household savings to fixed deposit came down from 60% to 49%, while for the mutual fund, it got up from 2% to 5%. What UTI has done, UTI knew the advantage or the potentials of beyond 30 cities very early on. Many decades ago, we started to have a concept to have presence in each and every district of our country. And therefore, we had a concept of BDA. I believe that our contribution to the industry has helped you not only to the industry, but to UTIMC also in growing our presence and our business. But let me just share with you and put some light on that for your question, whether we need to have this structure. And I believe yes. In 1995, UTI alone had over 5 lakh folios. 25 years after, our folio is just 10 lakh as an industry. At that particular point of time, we had 1 lakh, 100,000 IFAs. We still have 100,000 IFAs. I believe that beyond 30 cities provides a tremendous opportunity for the industry to grow, because the large amount of money going forward is likely to come from beyond 30 cities. And therefore, the beyond 30 cities structure which we have should be there. If you see the data as of December 2020, 26% of our total equity in a hybrid AUM, Ashish, comes from beyond 30 cities. My plan or my vision is to have a ratio of 50-50. And in order to capture this opportunity, I think all stakeholders, regulators, asset management companies, and the distributors need to. My industry and our trade body, AMFI, I'm very proud of Nilesh Bhai. Under his chairmanship and leadership, the trade body is doing a great job. He was instrumental of bringing the mutual fund CII across the group. I believe with AMFI's effort in popularizing and taking this forward, with technology coming in, when Dhruv Bhai and Nilesh Bhai is there, this particular industry will grow better and go beyond 30 cities. Over to you, Ashish.
Thank you. Look, so I think Mr. Rahman has kind of put it out. He wants the incentive structure to continue. I wonder if Neeraj, Dhruv, you have a point of view here.
Yeah, I think clearly what Mr. Right. And now it helps. I mean, the purpose is as I think saying of a small person. And I think it is for the first time in the last 5-10 years, we are seeing that this plan is working. And I think when something is working, we should let it work.
Okay.
I think many times in India, you know, success creates its own, okay, something has worked, now let's, you know, now it is not required.
Okay.
But I think we have a long way to go for the penetration. So I believe it should continue. And of course, I think the fact I would like to highlight is that the bottom of the pyramid is not only in terms of geography. I think we need to look at other innovative measures where, even like what Sundeep mentioned, that there are Dharavis everywhere. It is a Dharavi in Bombay also. He's doing work in mobilizing, you know, money from them, helping those people. I think some additional incentive for such effort needs to be.
Got it. I think so. So that's loud and clear that we should continue with something which has worked well. In fact, expand it beyond geographies. And let's come to that question a bit later. Sharad, I'll move to you. It's a very different segment that you serve. B30 probably is irrelevant for you in some ways, but you have a large customer base which is largely out of metros and tier 1 cities. And probably that is very amenable to investing in mutual funds. We would like to know what is the penetration that you have seen with Citi's customer base on mutual funds, If there are gaps, how are you planning to address that? And also, if you can take a slightly larger bank's perspective, banks have done so well. Maybe public sector banks have been a bit ahead, for example, on the whole Jan Dhan account side. What can banks do to really take mutual funds to every household where appropriate? Sharad?
Hi, Ashish, good to see you and happy to be on the panel. Yes, you're right. As far as we are concerned with Citi, we are not in the B30 in a physical way because, our geographic footprint is quite limited. But as Mr. Rahman said, and as what Dhruv said, and you mentioned it as well, it is about broad basing, correct? So B we can use instead of B30 like broad base 30 or broad base 50 or broad base 100, correct? And from that perspective, we also have an immense opportunity in broad basing. Citi classically has always looked at the affluent and the high net worth segment, in terms of reaching out for the purpose of mutual funds and investments. And that primarily was the case because it was a completely relationship manager, in person, physical paper, high degree of engagement model, which was led by a human. What we have got the benefit of is using the digital technology, using the mobile app to broad base the reach of the mutual funds and the investments concept. And like Mr. Rahman said, 12x, 2.3x, right, in terms of the growth over the number of years. If we look at, and I think it's a lot to do with the small, base, which has much more opportunity to multiply. In our entire spectrum of clients, when we look at the salaried customers, right, which are entry level clients, which we start to acquire, and we take that the other end of the spectrum at the absolutely high net worth customers, absolutely the penetration is very high in the high net worth customers, almost quarters. And in the Suvidha salaried type customers, it is very, very small. And that has to do with the sales process, that has to do with the availability. So distribution and presence plays a very important role. From a bank perspective, all banks have always looked at cross-sell and multiple products being made available to clients at the time of acquiring the client or through the life cycle. And classically, these products have always been about, bank account, which is the core one. And then, people talk about credit cards and loans. It is time, and it has been some time that, we look at mutual funds to be an integral part of the acquisition and the portfolio management, not in the PMS sense, but managing the customer base and ensuring that we almost have a responsibility, financial institutions almost have a responsibility towards clients to make them aware of mutual funds as a concept. We have made significant progress on that in terms of our thinking, in terms of the capability. We have a long way to go in terms of the penetration and making the numbers work. We do find some things that we can work out, but to sort of sum it up, absolutely banks, in my view, have almost a responsibility to their clients to make them aware, to educate them on mutual funds. I totally believe in mutual funds here, and I totally believe that irrespective of the surplus that a client has, a portion of that in the current interest rate environment and even otherwise needs to definitely go into building wealth through mutual funds.
Thank you, Sharad. And it'll be great to know from you at some point of time whether the incentive system of the people in the distribution channels are aligned to this thought process. Because it's a little bit of a short-term versus a long-term effect that can sometimes kick in and skew the picture a little bit on terms of effort.
Yes, we'll speak about that.
Thank you. Let me move to Neeraj. Neeraj, NJ has a unique vantage that it works with very large number and large variety of IFAs, from small to large IFAs, and for a very long period of time. So you really have the advantage of seeing the industry and seeing the distributors over a long period of time. It'll be good to know, Mr. Rahman pointed out, a certain number of IFAs, and that's what is staying in the industry. What is your observation? What kind of distributors join the industry? Who stay? Who exit? What is the fatality rate? How do we really broaden the industry participation so that distribution continues to remain robust and sustainable and goes to the last mile? Neeraj?
Yeah, thank you, Ashish. Unfortunately, my video is not working somehow, so you will only have to bear with my voice and not my face. Uh, now, talking to the point which we have been discussing, yes, I think broad basing is extremely important. While the penetration of mutual fund is increasing, and the good part is that it is increasing in the right way because we are getting inflows in SIPs. SIPs even during the times we are getting net positive flows in SIPs. So the maturity level of the investors' behavior of late, when we have seen particularly the retail investors, the data points out that it has improved significantly, which was not the case earlier. And that's where I guess the distribution community has played an important role. And even the mutual funds here campaign and other campaigns have played an important role in getting the retail investors into the mutual fund investments. Having said that, still I think from an absolute terms, the penetration is very low. And to my mind, I think to increase the penetration, the distribution footprint has to increase. It is extremely critical. After the abolition of entry load and rationalization of the expense structure, the challenge which an IFA as of now faces is that in the initial years, the commissions are very low. So the turnover take place because of the few IFAs who are unable to understand the potential, long-term potential of the business. What we have seen that once a IFA is working full-time or a distributor is working full-time and crosses a AUM of 5 crores, which generally takes a couple of years. And if it is a B30 or a smaller city, it might take slightly longer. But once that threshold is crossed, I think the next 5 years are very, very decent, very beautiful. And then that person will continue in business forever. So what I think as an industry is required, that we need to come out with campaigns where we have to explain that in the initial few years, if the distributor is not going to earn, while the opportunities in terms of employment is limited, and with the technology those opportunities are going down, but I still continue to believe that this industry has a tremendous potential of generating employment. And a campaign needs to be made, and it has to be made at a institution level, education institution level, where no one is thinking of building a career in mutual fund distribution or investment advisory. Everyone talks about becoming a chartered accountant or a company secretary, but no one talks about this. While this continues to be a very powerful profession, a powerful business which can be built. So I think and initial few years are the years where pain is there. There is no need of any investment. The investment here is in terms of time and a communication at an industry level, at across all the level. If that happens, then I think it is a win-win for all. The customers today has a pleasant experience investing in mutual funds. The mutual fund industry particularly would like to congratulate them in terms of the performance. The investments over last 25 years has been incredible, and those who have stayed invested, they have created wealth. And how to bring it to the last mile, how to get it to the every household, is where I feel while whatever is happening digitally, but this is a business of touch, this is a business of emotion, this is a business of behavior, where an individual can really make a difference. And this industry has a potential to generate jobs. which also in terms will help the country in an overall way. So I think that is what is required. Whatever you term B30, everywhere I think this penetration is required.
Understood. Very, very interesting points. Thank you, Neeraj, about attacking at the university level or the college level itself, thinking about campaigns which lay out the pros and cons. Dhruv, we have in the last 10-15 minutes itself, everyone has spoken about mutual fund CII Hai as a landmark campaign. It is a landmark campaign to promote mutual fund industry. Let me take on that. Neeraj also mentioned about we need to do more to create awareness. Do you think AMCs are doing enough to broad-based penetration? Do you think the cost pressures, the capital structures are barriers for AMC? You wish they could do more to get more and more people into the industry?
So I think they're doing the best that they can do in terms of broadening each AMC. I think as a business, they also put their AUMs, and therefore they do in terms of opening branches and going in a phased manner. But I think to my mind, I don't know, industry people will be better able to tell. But I think one of the things that the regulations have brought is that an AMC cannot invest from its own balance sheet for growing the market. Whole regulation on commission, and this whole debate of upfront and everything in trail. But if I want to grow my market, if I want to grow my reach, if I want to distribute, then you might want to spend in advance. You seed the market. So how do you create that? So for example, I would say today you have the digital platforms. The digital platforms, which are there and they're growing the market. How are they growing the market? They're offering a free sort of a zero cost service. That zero cost service is coming from their own balance sheet. Correct? You have a strong balance sheet, you're spending from your balance sheet and you're growing the market. So a digital venture capital funded distributor can expand the market and is expanding, and it should be allowed to expand. But the traditional, say the AMC cannot do it. So I think let's say as an IFA, there's a regulation which says that I cannot do rebating. I think the digital platform is offering a zero cost service. So why should not an IFA be allowed to spend that way? So I think to my mind there is a lot of ways that the innovation can be done, and AMC earns profit from its business. I think that I think is a constraint which I as an outsider see. I don't know whether I think Nilesh Bhai or Mr. Rahman, whether they see as a constraint in sort of expanding, but I think UPI itself, if you see in terms of the number of branches that they have got, I think Kotak, I think all the big AMCs have really increased the branches. And I think what is important is that the AMCs have done it sort of a cost ratio. So I think they have done reasonably well, but I think if some of the regulatory measures are made more free for the AMCs to spend on improving the market or growing the market.
Yeah, Dhruv, that was nice. You have laid out your demand list of what AMCs should be doing and you have used some very good examples from the startup world, which is how probably the penetration happens. Thank you, Dhruv. Let's to all the participants who are listening to this debate, if there are any questions, please feel free, and we will try to incorporate your questions. I'll flip the order a little bit. Sharad, given Dhruv pointed out a few things on the regulatory side, why don't I turn the light back to you? How can banks and can banks use the current disruption opportunity, and I use the term disruption opportunity, on advisory and commission models to address inclusion? You did mention something around digital. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. So, Ashish, as we all know, there is the entire thing, the whole model in the country has changed as far as mutual funds is concerned, correct? With the going away of the upfront regime, correct, and the lowering of the expense ratios, the maximum benefit is being passed on to the investor, which is a good thing, correct? And in that good thing, like Dhruv also mentioned, there is an expense to incur and the expense to educate, the expense to impart expertise, and the expense to engage the client. Clearly, advisory AUM growth in the marketplace has been a multiple of the growth in the overall retail mutual fund side. And also we have seen that because of the advent of many of these new non-bank organizations, non-bank organizations have grown quite rapidly, whether they are digital or of the type that my good friend Neeraj has. NJ is like an iconic brand in terms of proliferation of the industry. So, with all this, I think the key point becomes that how do you ensure that you're able to carry the service and get the service to the client in the right way that becomes profitable and that becomes, revenue accretive over a period of time. The farther we go, because of the fact that, there is more opportunity, the expense has to get, defrayed over a larger number of clients. And simplicity of the process of the mutual fund account opening, of figuring out how much to invest, of a simple SIP calculator, which fund is good, which fund is not good. Do not go by a fund primarily on the basis of past return. Assess your risk appetite. These are fairly important and absolutely imperative things to do. To do all this in a manner that requires the client to not be there in person, to be at a digital level, to be engaged with you, requires a very interesting and a very complex technology solution, which should appear very simple to the customer, correct? And that obviously comes at a cost. So I think we are all in this thing that people will grow more and with the returns that get to them more because of the expense ratios being less and everybody acting in the right interest of the client and to balance it with all of this to be done. So to break this, to solve this puzzle, I think the best technology solution will really work out. It won't work out, in my view, primarily only for mutual funds, because the stickiness of the relationship, I think, is going to be key. What people do with their accounts or what people do with one financial institution for one product should grow. Deepening is the way. Being invested with a particular distributor, with a particular advisor, time in the market. So, concepts that we generally believe for the customer, I think they hold as much for the intermediary, whether it be the advisory or the distributor. So, it's not a simple thing. And clearly people are trying multiple models. We are trying our own for sure. We are seeing success, but it is not something that we've solved completely.
Okay, so we look forward to what comes out. You have given us some framing, but let's look forward to what finally happens. All the best to that. Neeraj, I'm going to go back to you, and back to the B30 question. And I think there was a provocation by Mr. Rahman saying we really need this incentive structure. And Dhruv then mentioned that we need to think about B30 differently, and even Sharad mentioned that. Do you think there are pockets in, let's say, metros, in cities, where the penetration is not, maybe it's pin code wise, or maybe it's by affluence, micro markets in cities, where we need to think of incentive structures a bit differently? It may have a huge, obviously, compliance burden, but how do you really go after investors and customers who need mutual funds but are in top cities? Any thoughts, Neeraj?
Yeah, I think incentive is one part of the entire story. The larger part is that we have to educate the potential of this business to financial advisors, the financial distributors. If we are able to do that successfully and increase the number of feet on street, then that will make the difference. Because see, one thing which I would like to tell you, that a new mutual fund distributor who comes in the market, he has no clue about that there used to be upfront. It is the baggage of the existing distributors. There is no upfront now, right? So a new distributor, when we come, how we communicate to that new distributor, that matters in a big way. And the challenge today is about broadening the base. We need people to speak. While all the exercise is happening in terms of investor education, all the money is being spent, a huge amount of money is being spent on investor education. What about building the distribution fraternity? How to empower them, how to make them skillful? We need people who are skillful, who need common sense, to communicate these simple things. If we just are very advanced in terms of creating different type of products. Now, basically, there is no need of, there is obviously a need of that. It would be unfair to say that. But having said that, the larger need is to talk about simple things. And we need more number of people. When the ad happens of mutual fund CII on the national television, do we have enough number of distributors to convey that message and convert that amazing campaign into business? These are the things to ponder on. I think incentive obviously helps in the short run, but there is adequate money to make. I think if one is able to grow the AUM and have some patience. So I would rather feel that that is the area where, and it is not now, changing the structure every now and then is a simple thing now. In B30 also, a lot of churning has happened when upfront used to be there. So there are shortcomings of that also, but now things have simplified. Let that also continue. And in the larger markets where there are customers of the B30 nature, even in B30 there are customers who are high net worth. So now we cannot say that for those customers there will not be a B30 thing. So it's better not to discuss that and make things simple, and rather try to penetrate and grow the market. That's my thought.
Thank you, Neeraj. No, very clear. You're right. Probably enough money can be made if we are patient for anybody doing this full-time basis. Mr. Raman, that brings me back to you with a very interesting point and build off what Neeraj just mentioned. He feels incentive is not the right way, but really broad-basing the participation, really telling the benefits out there. And again, UTI has been a pioneer, right? From micro SIPs to goal-based investing, which I know is also one of your big objectives that you have taken to the market, small goals to large goals. You're very personally passionate about that. Can you just explain, how these concepts work, how much time and effort it takes to take it to the market, to the distributor community, and then what is the efficacy of these kind of campaigns?
Good point, Ashish. A couple of things. One is, before I go on the specific details, as you know, we have invested for over decades by way of Sutantrata as our investor education drive. And to answer to Neeraj Bhai questions or to support him, UTI has been rewarding or acknowledging the IFAs for last 10 years. The IFAs who did a good job across the length and breadth of the country, along with this CNBC that we have anchored for last 10 years, the IFA recognition program. So far as the micro SIP is concerned, or this piece is concerned, UTI is really, it is in our DNA. And I'm indeed very passionate about that. I have built various business in UTI alongside, along with Mr. Damodar and Mr. Sinha. Then Mr. Sinha, we introduced we started collecting 50 rupees from a BD worker in the partnership of Seva Bank many years back. Then Finance Minister had come and inaugurated this in one of the stadiums in Ahmedabad. We went to the villages of Bihar And we started collecting 50 rupees per month from the milkmans. We went to the Bihar, and now we have got around over 2 million accounts under a scheme known as Kanya Suraksha schemes. And it's a one-time investment. Government of Bihar invested 2,000 rupees. When a girl child becomes the age of 18, the money will go to them. So goal-based investing is very, very powerful tool to take the mutual fund to any level. Currently, we manage around 4 million such units. I am personally very passionate about this, but how we can take it forward. One, we need to have passion to take it. It is not very profitable, but how do we bring a smile to the people's face? And that is one of the role as the asset manager, which we have. So I think we need to have passion, and we need to have deep partnership to do this. For that, IFAs are required, friends like NJ is required, friends like Citibank is required, and various such distributors are required. Incentive, I believe, plays a very, very important role for the professional like you and me. If BCG does not give you incentives, you are basically at the end of the year, your mood is also down and you face a tough time with your wife. Similarly, for me as a professional, at the end of the year, if my incentive is not good, I'm bad. Incentive is very important to take this business forward. But one thing which comes to my mind, I'm really concerned about, why my IFA community cannot be recognized as a professional, like a chartered accountant. And UTI is ready to work on this, Ashish. We can help the industry and we can help the distributors to become the CFP qualified, to have complete knowledge and take this particular forum forward. Over to you, Ashish.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. As always, your passion kind of speaks through. There was a question on the chat, and I think Neeraj has answered that. If there are any further questions, please do type in, and either we'll try to answer it in the next 5 minutes, or we'll make sure you get an answer for that. Dhruv, that brings me probably to the final stages. A question for you. We have spoken about digital. I mean, everyone's on the panel and even earlier spoke about digital. It's disrupting our world across. And it will further happen. I mean, we look around the world, we look at fintechs now in India, the whole account aggregators, personal finance managers, it's going to happen. In banking, actually, if you think of an example, UPI has really taken the Indian and global market by storm. In fact, more platforms are being spoken about by the regulator. I'm just wondering, what is the impact of digital and direct investment on the IFA community? Do you think as industry, we should be investing on some omnibus technologies, platforms available to distributors, which really allow them to do the real advising job, really the value add job for which they build their trust and relationships with the clients? How can we reduce their burden on a continuous basis? Dhruv, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I think at least from an IFA perspective, I'm thankful Mr. Rahman mentioned that IFA, this thing should be considered as a profession. I mean, today we have a challenge. I don't know whether I can call myself an IFA or not. SEBI regulations, I suppose, wants that we be known as MFDs only. So, sometimes we get, the terminology is not important, the essence. So, technology is going to be an enabler. And what is happening is that at the upper end of the pyramid, everybody is adopting technology faster. And down, that's where the adoption of technology takes a little, more time. So it be in corporates, it be in individuals. I think in the distribution also, the smaller the IFA, sometimes the more time it takes to adopt technology. So something like an omnibus technology for the whole distribution community, especially for the small IFAs, who are in turn dealing with the small retail customer. Things like, what Mr. Rahman says, I know of doing 100 rupees SIPs and 500 rupees SIPs. So for them, I think, and I think the industry has put up an MF utility sort of a platform. But I think if that has to be enhanced, made robust, so that the IFA is able to focus on the touch part, I think while the business and digital is very important and it's somewhere about emotions. And the whole mutual fund industry is focused more on the technical part of it, the P ratios, the multiples, what's happening, the macro. But at the ground level, the small person who's saving money for his goals, I think that's the important, empathy or touch part where the personal touch is required. And if the individual distributor or IFA or RIA is helped through an industry-wide solution of a technology, and I think that would really enable the sort of growth to explode. The ability of, we hear so many stories of IFAs in smaller towns going on, their two-wheelers or on rickshaw, far out, 30 kilometers, 10 kilometers, with forms, filling forms, coming back. I think if those are the people at the grassroots level for whom a technology solution is provided, it's very difficult for them to find, a personalized or a customized solution for them. So, like NJ as a platform offers that to IFAs who would come on the NJ platform. So that is one option. But something like an MF utility or which is made more robust, I think it really would help a lot of the smaller IFAs in smaller towns and to reach out to the smaller investors in those places.
Excellent. We are almost end of the time. So I'm going to just have one very quick question to all the panelists. And I want a response in maybe a phrase or a word. And maybe Dhruv will begin with you and go the other way. So, we worked with Amphi and many of the industry stalwarts participated and helped us put together a report on mutual fund industry going to 100 trillion, a lakh crore rupees in a few years from now. If that has to happen, inclusive growth is must. To achieve inclusive growth, what is the one area you want a change in the industry?
I think being clear that जैसे mutual fund sahi campaign is there, सारथी जरूरी है. In an investor's lifetime journey of savings, he needs somebody to help him.
Right.
I think there are very 1% people who can do it.
Thank you, Dhruv. We'll keep it to a phrase only because we are at the end of time. Neeraj, one thing you want to change or happen for us to move from 30 to 100 trillion?
Yeah, the feet on street has to increase the distribution bandwidth.
All right, thank you. Sharad?
Ashish, I would say continued simplification. Just make it simpler for the client to invest. Just make it simpler to open accounts. Just make it simpler to do KYC. So simplicity, how much we can help the client to be simple.
Excellent. And Mr. Rahman, last word. Mr. Rahman, can you hear us? All right, maybe that is...
Empower the IFAs distributors.
Empower. Well, thank you very much for taking all the questions and really putting out a wonderful set of ideas. I'm sure we will benefit by this. Thank you, and back to you, Rajiv.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garg, and all the panel members for this engaging plenary panel session on inclusion as the growth imperative for the Indian mutual industry. Great insights to take back. We now quickly move on to the next panel session, which is on digital and technology in the mutual fund industry, early adopters and two trendsetters. I invite Mr. Ruchin Goel, who's the Managing Director and Senior Partner at Boston Consulting Group, to moderate this session. Mr. Goel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rajiv. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to moderate the next session. The title of our session is Digital and Technology in Mutual Funds, Early Adopters and Two Trendsetters. So if you look at the entire financial services sector in India, we are at an inflection point, I would say, of adopting digital. And the pandemic really accelerated the adoption of digital across all financial services sectors. But if there is one sector that stands out as a sector that has been an early adopter of technology, clearly within financial services, it is the mutual fund industry. And that is why when the pandemic hit, I think this industry was so ready to do everything digitally. So there was least amount of disruption because the industry was already ready doing end-to-end digital. I have a very illustrious panel to discuss this topic today. We have Mr. Vijay Chandok, CEO of ICICI Securities, a very early trendsetter when it comes to direct digital, both broking and mutual fund distribution. We have Mr. Nitin Kamath, CEO and founder of Zero. Again, a big disruptor when it comes to using technology to disrupt the established business models. We have Mr. Vishal Kapoor, CEO of IDFC Asset Management, and Kailash Kulkarni, CEO of L&T Mutual Fund. So they will bring the perspective from the AMC manufacturing perspective. And finally, we have Mr. Anuj Kumar, CEO of CAMS, who really has a good bird's eye view of what's happening in the entire industry from a data perspective. So to start the discussion, if I can invite Anuj, you to just talk about what have you seen in terms of a digital adoption trend in the whole mutual fund industry, both pre and post COVID. If you can just help us, all the audience here, just to kind of share some numbers and some trends. It'll be a good context to kind of start the entire panel discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Richard, and I hope I am audible and visible to the audience.
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I could do is start with some context in terms of how the evolution of the industry has happened. Maybe my focus will be a little more on customer interaction, service, and transaction, more that kind of stuff than the advisory part. However, it will give you a good bird's eye view in terms of how the trends have been catching on. The overarching statement I would make, Ruchan, and to the audience is that the mutual fund industry has really been a pioneer, but I would say in a slightly unsung kind of a way. And I illustrate this point, I think it will become visible just with the help of numbers and facts. A lot of contrast at the first level is created between digital and electronic transactions and paper transactions. And when I talk of transactions, there are typically three parts of it. When you do it on paper, all of that is completely asynchronous. So a consumer brings in a transaction, which is a form, brings in a payment through a check, and then wants to get a KYC done. And there was a point not too long back, 10 years back, this used to be 90% of the market. All three processes are asynchronous, go in their own different directions, but have to converge very quickly in order to get the person serviced. With the advancement of time, and I would say this is just collective contribution, AMCs, of course, blessed by the regulator, RTAs, banks, sellers, all of them, that the adoption has been very rapid from 90% of paper in about 2010-11, think of about 50% paper in 2016-17, contracting to just 25% in 2019, and about 13% last year. And within that 13%, and some of that was COVID induced, I would say the 25 falling very sharply to 13 was COVID induced. But within that, I would say corporates, HNIs, and some of the NFO traffic is really largely on paper. But a lot of do-it-yourself investors and most of these sellers have now chosen to go with one or the other platform. And within this, one trend which used to happen earlier is that new consumers largely came on paper till 2019. Despite the fact that the aggregate was 25%, more than 50% of new consumers, new to mutual funds, when they came with a KYC, came with a piece of paper. And it is stark to notice that despite the absence of Aadhaar KYC, it was sunset for the capital markets in 2017, is just coming back like in the past few weeks, although it was blessed about 6 months back. 70 to 80% of the KYC also moved to alternate electronic means, non-Aadhaar, which means it was a bit of a handicap. However, the industry picked up very quickly. And with Aadhaar, I'm sure that that trend will get accentuated even more. So that's one large overarching part in terms of just transactability and how individuals and brokers and sellers engage in the world of mutual funds. But let me give you the other side, and that's the more unsung side because we don't talk too much about it. And think of the entire connectivity of AMCs, RTAs, and sellers and platforms, whether it is web portals, stock exchanges, all the API play has been very intense over the last 4 to 5 years. Majority of the servicing has moved there. And I can tell you that while it is not my attempt to kind of underrate or undersize any one sector, if you contrast us with the banks, you will see today, even today, we do most of our reconciliation without banking APIs, which means purely just downloading statements in the crude old way. But those APIs have not become as democratized and as participative as this industry has done. Think of the industry as the first sector which did one common central KYC repository. And like I said, of its own volition, moved to about 80% adoption last year. Think of the power of aggregation, the CAS, which you can today read of one AMC, multiple AMCs, all your mutual fund holdings, has been available for the last 8 to 10 years. In other sectors, through the account aggregator architecture, we're just beginning to talk about it. And of course, I'm sure it will happen and it will happen very rapidly. But in the mutual fund sector has been available instantly for the last decade. Instant account statement since inception, you go to your bank site. Even today, you have the option, do you want it for 6 months, 12 months, 10 years? But we give statements since inception, again, for a length of time. When I add to all of this, the vast reconciliation of payment and settlement activity that the industry does, 300 to 400 lakh crore worth of throughput with negligible errors and negligible money at risk. When you see the low kind of fraud kind of vulnerability of the industry, and when you juxtapose all of this with overnight setting up of accounts, instant statements, all of that, I think a lot happens in the background, Ruchi, and the audience in terms of how the industry is adopted, not just at the front end, not just for transactions and engaging with consumers and sellers, but right up to the end of the food chain.
When it comes to digital adoption, in the entire financial services sector, and just kind of moving from the back end now to the front end, and talking about what have been some of the trends that we've seen, what kinds of customers are coming digital, online, has there been any change in the profile of people? So Nitin, I'll invite you to talk about what are you seeing in terms of profile of customers, their behaviors. What are you seeing, in terms of digital customers?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. No, I mean, see, for us, most of these customers are first time to the market. So around 60 to 70% of the customers are opening an account for the first time. So they have not invested in the markets before. The average age of the customer is closer to 30. So it's actually a lot of millennials. I think what we've also seen is this audience likes to learn. I think they've been born to the Google world, so they like to figure out stuff on their own before they start investing in trading. So the education initiative that we run, which is called Varsity, is extremely popular. I think we launched a mobile app last year. It's got like 1.5 million or something like that, users on the platform, learning stuff on a constant basis. So I mean, while there are claims made that a lot of these users are from a lot of tier 2, tier 3 cities, if you kind of track this audience by their IP addresses, they still kind of belong to the top 15 cities. But if you kind of track them by their address proofs, then you actually see a lot of distribution in tier 2, tier 3 cities. I'm guessing it's because a lot of people who are 20s, early 20s, mid 20s, they move from their smaller cities and towns to large cities looking for jobs. And so maybe their address proof on Aadhaar doesn't get updated right? So maybe but I think there's still a big opportunity in kind of taking the markets to those tier 2, tier 3 cities. I think it's still very concentrated in the top 15 cities. At least that's what we are seeing at Zero Balance.
Thank you, Nitin. I think quite interesting to know that 60-70% customers are opening accounts digitally, first-time customers. So they're very comfortable.
Yeah. Digitally is 99% today. So I mean, only 1% of the customers, and mostly that is because a lot of these are HUFs or corporates who can't open accounts digitally. But all the individual accounts, almost all today open completely digitally. So all these DigiLocker, eSign, all of that has helped us significantly.
Great. So Vijay, do you want to also add a perspective on what you see on your platform in terms of profile of customers coming online, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic?
Yeah. So out here at ICICI Securities, ICICI Direct, we are seeing a very similar kind of a trend in terms of the nature of customers. Interestingly, mostly youngsters entering in large numbers. And when you count numbers versus AUM, you get a very interesting dichotomy. The numbers of customers are increasing, whereas the AUM, in the industry level, as you've seen, is showing a pressure over there. We are actually seeing growth in systematic investment plan from the investors. So it's precisely reflecting the profile that these are youngsters coming in with small bites. There's an outflow of money on the other end of the spectrum in the HNI segment. So that's probably the overall headline number lower. On our platform, we are seeing a shift towards smaller ticket size and greater numbers of transactions. And the other interesting story that we are seeing playing out is that there is a growing interest towards ETFs as an asset category, which is also growing. And we see good embracement of ETFs on our platform as a kind of a variant to their investment preference. So I would just add these couple of points. Yeah, at an overall level, we are also seeing debt in more recent times over equity getting preferred at an overall level. So I'll just add these few more colors to what Nitin said.
Thanks, Vijay. I think one of the interesting points you thought about is the growing popularity of ETFs. And I'll pick the theme more broadly, ETFs. So if I can move to you, Vishal, and just start looking at the role technology plays in the entire asset management industry, active versus passive, fund management, robo advisory, the whole interplay between what can be done by humans and what can be done by technology. How do you see this evolving over time? And what is your view in terms of what will happen over the next 3 to 5 years in India?
Right. Thanks, Ruchin, and good to be here. You mentioned robo advisory and fund management. So let me start with the advice and distribution, and what may be happening there. Clearly, I think what we have seen over the last few years is the benefit of scale getting accelerated because of use of technology, whether it's the platforms or whether it's just enablement through simplicity, things like eKYC. So usage of technology to build scale, and one of the themes here is inclusion, has been a great benefit to this industry. When we look at the number of new PANs and new signups, especially like Nitin mentioned, using a completely end-to-end digital process, it's incredible to see what technology has been able to do. So that's a great benefit that we've seen from technology. And clearly, as we get more and more into Gen Y moving to Gen Z, I think that will only accelerate. But we have to keep in mind that, while this is the new generation, which is happy to sign up and use simple, scalable, and standardized, products and tools to get what they want quickly, there is still the market for humans So I wouldn't completely therefore say that, the market for humans or the need for, face-to-face contact and advice has gone away as yet. And, one sort of industry one can look at is maybe the healthcare industry, or where you have technology driving a lot of change in diagnostics and surgery, making it very accessible to people, especially in far-flung areas, right? But that does not mean that your need for the family doctor has gone away. So the need for behavior management, human touch, someone you can go to and really, be able to talk to, might still be, very, very relevant. So to my mind, yes, there is a huge benefit of technology that we've already seen, and we'll continue to see that in getting access and getting scale and getting new customers into the industry. But at one level, behavior, emotion, all of these other factors, which is very closely linked with money, will still need probably the human touch. And therefore, obviously, the winning combination would be, a human being who can combine this technology, get the best of both worlds, which a lot of people, like our friend Vijay, is already beginning to do with, technology with people. So a lot of those models will also, I guess, be popular. So that's on advice. Fund management is another very incredibly interesting area for use of technology. I think for almost decades now, we've seen fund managers at the forefront of leveraging technology and using really cutting edge tools to get sharper and better at their trade. Because at a fundamental level, you're dealing with humongous amount of data, and speed and accuracy with processing it gives you an edge. So, use of technology becomes the obvious benefit to you. But what started with just processing to then moving to algorithms and linear type of decision making, I think now is making a very big shift with AI and ML techniques getting embedded. So the earlier process and phase of just using computers to analyze and give you some simple decisions, which led to a big industry around, HFT and, using simple models to try and predict, where to invest or what to invest, or basically add as enablers to fund managers. I think that is now dramatically shifting to let the computer come up with the decision through AI and ML, because the shift is now from linear to non-linear, making sense out of complex data, which in fact a human being may not be able to do. So that's something that we should now watch out for. Of course, it needs a lot of data to be able to get right results. So one part of the industry where there is rich data available may benefit immediately from AI ML techniques and fund management. At IDFC, we've been trying that, with some products. But another part of the market where data is just not available or under, penetrated, there the art of fund management, of stock picking, of going meeting management, smelling the sort of the dealership and the streets will still have a lot of value.
Interesting, very interesting, Vishal. I think you picked on two very important points, and I want to build on those. But I'll actually move to another topic here. But I'll come back to this point on advice. How much of advice can be done by digital versus human beings? And you went down the middle path, saying that look, both have an important role to play. But it'll be interesting to hear are there other views in terms of the advice becoming more and more digital and less human. Is there a model where a lot of people who are, at least a segment of people who are comfortable dealing with technology, also being able to get their advice online and not depend on a human person? So is that a big shift? Any reactions from the panel members on this? I know there are people who are trying it out on their websites.
So clearly, this is Kailash here. Clearly, one of the things that we see is that there is a certain generation who's very, very comfortable seeking advice online or using chatbots or, using all kinds of different technologies and not necessarily wanting to physically meet somebody to get advice. They are okay to do their research, okay to do their entire, transactions online. And they are happy to get whatever basic understanding about the product, about the segment, and then take their own decisions.
So there is a large segment, but I'd agree with what Vishal said that for some time to come, at least in India, you will need to have a hybrid model, especially for people who are not so used to technology. I think one of the biggest advantages of the pandemic, if I have to put in, is that there was a majority of the customers who are refusing to touch technology are now very happy to use technology because they don't want to meet physically. And they're saying, nahi, hum log invest karenge, par hum log आप link भेज दीजिएगा, we'll click the link and get the investment done. So, there's telephonic, there's video, there's chatbots, there's a multiple interface which is happening today with a variety of clients. And the other big advantage which all distributors have today is you're not geographically centered anymore. So a distributor who had 90% of his clients from the city that he was serving, today he can just go through any city anywhere in the country or internationally and service, because everybody is offering these online services which are there.
Great point. I think you're making, Kailash. I think the technology can really also expand the reach of advisors, and they're not then limited to one city or even within city. Sometimes just one part of the city, a large city like Mumbai. So technology. So again, your point is that technology and people will coexist, because that's the trust and human element that's so important to educate the customers.
That's right.
Any other views on this before I move on? The consensus view that's coming out is, while technology is evolving and will continue to evolve, the physical distributors will continue to play a very, very key role in just ensuring the right advice, the right trust.
So, Ruchin, I just want to add one point out here. The physical distributor will have to provide online transaction facility to his clients. He can't just do the paper model. It's not going to be a sustainable one in future. So he'll have to marry the physical visits along with use of technology for the transaction purpose. And that is going to be very, very crucial for him. And if he wants to grow, he will have to start using technology to connect to his customers through webinars such as these, or, multiple one-to-one video calls to really interact with his customers. So that's something which, if they don't provide, then possibly they will be the dinosaurs of this industry. They'll get extinct very fast.
Yeah, and we heard Anuj, talk about the numbers. Even today, only 13% transactions are happening through paper. So 87% have already moved digital. So you're very right, Kailash. I think even the physical distributors will require, digital. So just moving on, I think another important theme, and I
sorry, if I may just jump in here, just a couple of additional points on this advice bill. I think I'm also seeing a trend that, technology is giving an imaginative ways of packaging research and advice to customers in a manner that it gets delivered in a technology and a digital medium. So, for instance, tools can be made where there is a back-end research which is carried out, and then that is translated into an investment theme, digitally packaged and delivered like an investment basket that investor understands. It is not just anything; it is thematically researched and presented to him in an understandable, digestible format, much like an instant package of noodle or just heat and eat kind of a stuff that is available in the market. So literally, I think technology is enabling creation of do-it-yourself research packaged and delivered for him to just heat and eat. So I would still believe that these are early days, and more as thinking evolves, as technology evolves, as developments in artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated. I would believe that more and more use of technology into this whole element of advice is inevitable.
Yeah, and put this very starkly. I heard Vishal almost compare this industry to the healthcare industry, saying that, look, despite all the technology coming, the family doctor will never go away. And I concur with that. On the other hand, like a travel industry, which used to have a large number of these small, travel advisors or travel agents, have become extinct. And they don't exist right now because you don't require that much advice in travel. It's transaction processing, it's all digital. So, I mean, are we going towards the travel advisory model that it all be largely online, very limited physical, or do we believe that it's the family doctor, the advice is so critical that the role of that human being will stay?
I'll jump in again. I don't think we have to take a call on it just now. I think I don't want to double guess the future. I want to move ahead with a more agile mindset. Move ahead with what's working just now, and then with a clear understanding that you've got to jump one way or the other when the situation is becoming clearer than what it is today. Is there a place for a physical model? I surely think there's a place for a physical model just now. Will it remain and will it continue like this? I don't know. Maybe it will. And will digital take over? In all probability, it will. But has it taken over? Not yet. Does it have the potential? I think it does. When will it happen? I don't know. So move ahead with an agile mindset and jump when you have to.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think we are probably one of the largest digital players in this country. But if you were to ask me to grow this, I think we need to be physical. It might sound a little weird coming from me, but so the people who come use our platform, they're comfortable doing it only to a certain extent. I mean, if I'm earning 50,000 rupees, I might have an SIP for 5,000 rupees, right? But then as soon as the AUM becomes sizable, people start freezing, right? And so they need help. So for sure, India needs a professional advisory ecosystem. And I think it's onus on platforms like us to put all enablers in place for these guys to come flourish on top of us, right? Because if you let people on their own, they're going to do mistakes. And we see that happening. I mean, we are today trying to use technology to at least nudge people away from mistakes. But usually when there is greed and fear, those nudges people kind of ignore. So so I think what India needs is a conflict-free advisor kind of an ecosystem, right? Where every advisor, the incentive for the advisor should be to turn his customer into a professional type. So in a sense, because historically, I think that's been one of those legacy issues, right? As in, this whole how advisors earn has been an issue. But now that there is clarity around that, it's kind of quite clean. I think, I think we should just figure a way to enable more advisors to come and build like an ecosystem, like how US has done. I think US has done it. I mean, while you can still question the fees they collect, but but I think they've done a great job in terms of growing the ecosystem, getting a lot more people to invest, save, and grow as well.
Great. I think this is a very rich discussion. I will not want to go into the whole advisor earning model. It's quite a contentious issue. Let's focus on the topic of digital. We'll open up a can of worms here. So if I move on, I think another key part of our discussion was on inclusion. And if I want to bring Kailash you back on the topic of inclusion, I think the industry has done a lot, but we've only just scratched the surface. There is so many investors who still don't invest in mutual funds. In fact, we've seen a very healthy amount of people opening demat accounts, but not yet started doing mutual funds. I mean, what's your perspective on what can the industry do more? Maybe using digital to increase the number of customers.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think I have an answer which is in two parts. One clearly lies within the boundaries of all the asset management companies and the distribution fraternity. And that's clearly their responsibility on how they can grow. Especially now that you have got Aadhaar-based KYC, you absolutely, like Nitin was just saying, barring those HUFs or some of the corporates where you have to do physical. Today, you can really push the boundary walls and go and acquire new customers, new client segments digitally. And I think one very important thing which we all overlook is that if you look at the last 15, 20 years of this industry, you have equal number of customers who have experienced this industry and gone out of this industry. And today they have a zero folio. So the number of zero folios is very, very high. I mean, if we just use data analytics on these zero folios and win them back, you will see many more new customers. Possibly you will be able to double the investor base from the active investor base that is there today. So that can be purely done through digital means as we go ahead. What else can the industry do? I think the biggest, or I think one of the failings of this industry, I would say, is that we talk too much English. You know, we don't have simple, easy to understand language. Most of our communication is so complicated for a common investor that he runs away from us. So when you start talking of YTM and bond deals and swaps and things like that, a common investor does not understand these things. Can we simplify the language to absolute basics and have it in 14 or 16 or 18 or 20 regional languages? You know, and today with technology, it's relatively far simpler to get translations done, you know, communication done. You can target segment literally down to the household on which language he or she is going to receive the communication, you know, whether it's going to be Bengali or Odia or Malayalam or, you know, Kashmiri. So you can do that today. And I think if we are able to simplify the way we communicate, I think that will win us many more customers from an industry perspective. I think there is one request I would have for regulators also. And I think it's high time today that we stop measuring ourselves on assets under management basis. Okay, because this industry is meant for getting more investors into this industry. And I think the ranking, rather than it being on AAUM, should be on the number of investors that each asset management company has. And it can be a cumulative ranking, which means from inception, how many investors you have, or you could also have a ranking which is just for the year, which means that if you're starting on 1st of April, all 44 AMCs are now on equal footing, and maybe the 35th AMC in terms of AUM today can stand a chance to become the number one AMC because that AMC has added more individual customers to this industry rather than, you know, just looking at it at a folio level and say we have 9 crore folios or something like that. I think we need to work in tandem. So a lot has to be done by the industry. But if we introduce a ranking system which ranks AMCs on number of customers, I think we'll all start chasing how do I get to the next 10 million customers very, very fast. So that is something which I would like to put on the table.
Great points, Kailash. I love the point on, you know, simplifying language and multilingual. But, you know, my experience of the industry is, you know, just this whole language of top 30, beyond 30, we're just so focused on the big cities, right? That the focus on smaller towns, and, you know, as Nitin said, even someone like a Zerodha is looking at the IP address. It's all coming from the large towns. So the industry has so far been concentrated. So it's a chicken and egg problem. You know, do you start investing in multilingual, hoping that those people will come, right? Or, you know, you will first wait for evidence that there are customers out there, and then you will go and, you know, invest behind it. So
one small change in that also can help. If you want to incentivize, instead of incentivizing the same HNI who keeps repeating the transactions from a B30, today there is technology which tells you whether the investor is new to the industry. Like Nitin was just saying, you know, that he knows exactly how many customers are new to the industry because they're doing KYC for the first time. You incentivize basis a new investor. Now, whether that investor comes from Dharavi in Mumbai or he comes from Dharwad in Karnataka, how does it make a difference? And the moment you incentivize new investors, I'm sure the next level of growth, what SEBI did when they did B30 was great because you saw more flows coming in from B30. If you do now new customers, you'll be able to just proliferate and really increase the number of customers from small towns also.
Some great ideas. And, you know, anyone in the audience, you know, who's listening to this discussion, if you have any comments, questions, please feel free to post in a chat. You know, we'll pick it up. We are in the last 7 minutes of our discussion in the panel. But I will continue with the discussion. I think We've touched upon many aspects on digital and technology. One important aspect, as the industry grows, on the one hand, there is this entire need to invest to grow in smaller towns, bring new investors, which will be a little expensive for the industry because the ticket size is smaller. But on the other hand, there will also be pressures in terms of the overall fees coming down. So there is this trade-off between going broader, where you'll be able to service newer and smaller customers. On the other hand, as the industry grows and size becomes large, the expectations would be, that the industry can operate at a lower cost. How to think about this trade-off, and what role can technology, digital play to really break the trade-off? And again, anybody can come in to talk about it.
Richard, maybe I'll give it a shot first. I think what you're mentioning is one of the biggest challenges as well as the opportunities in front. Because I guess as many of our distribution partners as well as the AMC colleagues can testify, margins are just one direction. That is something you can predict, which is it's coming down. Other things you cannot predict, just keep that aside. Margins are coming down. I think we've seen that on a very, very steady basis over the last several decades almost. So that's a certainty. Now, one of the ways that this industry, in one sense, has almost been forced to adapt and change and need to really take forefronts is because of that need to sort of improve efficiency, cut wastage across the full length and breadth of what we do. Starting with just the payment costs that we incur, or the sort of transaction processing, KYC. For any industry to build scale, I guess that is important. But we thankfully at an industry-wide platform rather than just by each of us doing it individually. That's been a big benefit of collaboration so that we get the scale benefits. So clearly, getting tech embedded, embraced into everything that we do, to me is one of the most imperative steps that we have to take to make sure that there is enough left on the table for both distributors as well as AMCs to get some reasonable reward at the end of the day, while the customer benefits through a lower cost product which is delivered more efficiently. So what we've already seen is great innovation with, like I mentioned, KYC, payment processing. Our friends, Anuj is here in CAMS working with us to see how we can really cut cost and reduce wastage. Even with things like recon and turnaround times or automation, whether it is on the phone call or whether it's chatbots on websites, etc. So that's all happened and happening, and that should continue. The next level that I think globally people are beginning to see is in the area of fund management. There have been some cases of large groups of analysts being let go, replaced by machines, because ostensibly they can do the job better, smarter, easier. So that may be one trend that we will eventually see, that team sizes will get smaller in fund management because there's a lot of things machines can do. Even in areas like product design, we've seen already a lot of innovation with passive products and smart beta products, factor type indices coming in, where you try and deliver the same product at a much finer cost. And be able to, because it's low cost, everyone gets the benefit of margin there, as well as marketing, just being very targeted. I think the FMCG industries have done a very good job. E-commerce has done an excellent job. But the mutual fund industry has been very quick in learning some of those techniques. I would see that tech in bringing our costs down and allowing this business to have economic sustenance is absolutely central.
Thanks, Vishal. I think a lot of good points on how technology can continue, to create efficiency in the entire value chain. And I think the companies that embrace it faster, earlier, will be the winners of the future. So we are coming to the very end of our time allotted. I can just summarize in the last couple of minutes about key points that have been made in the discussion. We started the discussion by saying that the industry has been a very early trendsetter. Even 10 years back, the industry had a completely end-to-end digital process. While only 10% customers used it, that process existed. And today, after 10 years, it is the other way around. The 90-10 has become 10-90, where only 10% customers are using paper-based, 90% customers are all digital. And we also heard from Nitin that new customers who are coming in are actually all digital. So this industry has been a quite early trendsetter in the use of digital. Then there was a very good discussion on the interplay between human and digital, and how digital can be used to provide high quality advice, but also to increase the effectiveness of the physical advisor. Where the physical advisor's reach can go up, the transaction processing can become digital, but the human touch, the advice and the trust can still remain physical, because people like to talk and take the advice, especially in the higher AUMs. We spoke about the inclusion, how to add new customers. There were a lot of good suggestions that came about in terms of measuring not just AUMs but number of new customers that the industry is adding, or one particular AMC is adding, and that can be used as a way of ranking. We discussed also the evolution of newer ways to increase efficiency, so that the industry can benefit even when the margins are coming down. And finally, there were a lot of good discussions on, going beyond the big cities and, going in local languages, having, language that is simple, products that are simple, both low cost but simple for the customers to understand. So clearly, a lot of exciting, new things on the anvil. I thank all the panel members. I think it was a very rich discussion, and we are exactly on time. I'll hand it over back to you, Rajiv.
Thank you, Mr. Goel. It was a pleasure to hear the panel discuss on digital and technology adoptions in the mutual fund space in India. Thank you for moderating this panel session, and we were pleased to hear insightful comments from Mr. Chandok, Mr. Kapoor, Mr. Kamath, Mr. Kulkarni, and Mr. Anuj Kumar. Thank you once again, all the panel members. Yes, thanks a lot. I now invite Mr. Mayank Jha, the Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group, to take charge of his next panel. The theme is embedding tighter compliance and risk management while balancing growth. Mr. Jha, inviting you to start your panel session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sijo. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's my pleasure to introduce a very esteemed panel to all of you. On the panel, we have Mr. A. Balasubramaniam. Is Bala there?
Yes.
Hi. Hello. I was looking for you.
Hello, man. Yeah, how are you?
Hi. Mr. Balasubramaniam is the MD and CEO of Aditya Birla Sun Life AMC. We have Mr. N. Shivaraman, who is the MD and Group CEO of ICRA. We have with us Mr. N.S. Venkatesh, who is the Chief Executive of AMFI with us. We also have the pleasure of having Lakshmi Iyer, who is the CIO Debt and Head Products for Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company. And Mr. Nilesh Surana, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Mirai Asset Management Fund. I welcome all the panel members, and this is a very interesting discussion that we have today on embedding risk as we actually go along the growth trajectory that we have seen in the industry. Now, I have a short presentation. If you can all see the screen, to lay some of the context. Now, as we look at the industry, it has gone through major economic shocks, right? And the left-hand side is something that we keep seeing coming in the press, as if there's been many issues in managing the industry. But we have to give the industry credit where it is due. As we look at complaints, compared to the total number of portfolios, we as an industry have been continuously improving between FY 15-16 to the last 2 years. There has been a 60% reduction in terms of total number of complaints that the industry has seen as a proportion of number of portfolios. So the industry is actually moving fairly significantly in terms of making sure that our investors have a good experience while investing with the industry. And as we look at risks, there are certain risks that get highlighted in the market, which we see in the top half, which is the credit risk, liquidity risk, market risk. These are the ones that we hear about. But there is also a lot of risks that mutual funds have to manage, which are sitting below the line of visibility of the investors. There is a large amount of investor data which is sitting with the mutual fund companies. There are lots of points of interaction with the industry where there could be data leakages, there could be frauds, etc. So there are a lot of elements of risk that we manage. And we at BCG had done a study globally, and how companies look at risks. So while there is a lot of focus that happens on the core investment risks, the other risks that companies are exposed to are something which is still not fully embedded, across risk managers globally, right? And this is an evolving journey that that we are seeing. Closer home, as we look at data from some of the benchmarking that we have done, we see that as a country, both in terms of absolute dollars and in terms of people that we deploy on risk and compliance, we are a few percentage points behind global averages. So while there is about 1.7% of costs that go on risk and 1.9% on compliance globally as a percentage of total costs, in India, those corresponding numbers are 0.6 and 1.1%. So there is clearly an opportunity to manage risks better, to even improve the experience of our investors, and also gain more confidence, from the investors. These are some of the points and data facts that I wanted to lay down to start the discussion. And with this, I would now like to invite some of my panel members to share their views. Maybe let me start with you, Bala. You have been a veteran in the industry. You've seen it for multiple years. How have you seen the risk management and compliance evolving over the last decade?
Yeah, interesting, Mike. I think you presented very nicely the various risks associated with the mutual fund and covering both investments and operation related risk. I think if you look at the way the mutual fund industry has managed the risk the last number of years, is something uncomparable with any other industry which has gone through a major issues with respect to the rising NPAs and a lot of uncertainty which the banking industry would have faced. In comparison to that, the mutual fund industry has managed the risk quite well. And second is the MF industries have also been a key participants in the development of the capital market, especially with respect to the fixed income. Equity, of course, well developed. There has been a wider participation coming from foreign investors, whereas the debt market is predominantly a domestic focused and institutional investment kind of market. 95% of the debt market is controlled by institutional investors. In that, mutual funds have played a very key role by improving the asset size in the fixed income market. Today, 60% of the mutual fund assets and management coming from fixed income. It's come purely on the back of the offering a product which caters to the different risk needs of the customers, ranging from conservative to aggressive. Also, such an increase in fixed income market have also helped the development of the bond market so nicely. And despite being a large player in the fixed income market, the risk associated with such managing money, largely coming from liquidity risk, and coming from credit risk. And I would assume all such things, the industry, of course, manages it quite nicely. See, one of the things that, of course, the first lesson for the industry as well as the financial market, and as the size of the industry grows, definitely you can always call it becomes systemically important from the financial market point of view. So therefore, it needs constant attention during crisis time, how the market is going to get impacted because of the flows, inflows and outflows of the mutual fund industry. Therefore, how the risk has to be managed, how the liquidity has to be provided. I would also thank regulator. Along the way, they've also brought in certain new regulation on the basis of the learning of the mutual fund industry is managing money dynamically and then evolving certain processes. So I always take pride being part of the mutual fund industries is only because of that some of the regulatory framework we ourselves have realized where the risk should be controlled and so on and so forth, and bring in regulatory framework, working closely with the regulator through AMFI, and then evolve a process. Therefore, risk management can also be taken care. So that's why I'll put it as a starting point, and I'm sure you'll have more point to discuss as we move along.
Yeah. Thank you for setting context here, Bala. Mr. Venkatesh, I would like to get your views, here, as an AMFI chair, you've seen industry being increasingly more compliant, and whenever there are complaints, it is often said that all the required boxes that were required to be ticked were ticked, but in the end, investor is still unhappy. He has not gotten the returns. He has been missold. He or she has been missold. So is the compliance that we are driving in the industry, while it may be 100% compliance in terms of the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law, which is supposed to protect investor interests, may be compromised. What is it that is happening, and is the spirit of the law something that can be protected even more? Mr. Venkatesh, you are on mute.
Thank you so much. I would say that from your own slides, the complaints percentage has come down. That itself shows that the compliance culture with respect to the mutual fund industry has grown dramatically over the last 5 years, whatever you're looking at it. Always there is scope for improvement. It is not as if there is no scope for improvement. There is always a scope for improvement. You can continuously improve because excellence has no finish line. That is where it is. But having said that, all the mutual funds are very much compliant with whatever SEBI has prescribed as per their guidelines. There is nowhere you can see that the compliance has been breached, sort of thing. SEBI itself gets a half-yearly CTR compliance report, where essentially the AMCs are supposed to specify what are all the compliances that they have to do and how much have they progressed as far as the compliance is required. So the CTRs are filed properly. We also collect in AMFI half-yearly report from our members and place it before our board for our review to see that how far the compliance is there, whether any more best practices guidelines needs to be put in. So at AMFI level, we continuously try to keep on putting best practice guidelines on the operational framework. That operational framework, best practices guidelines are, it's a guidance note, I would say. So that guidance notes help the mutual fund industry to ensure that they are able to do the compliance both in letter and spirit. But having said that, yes, there will always be some scope here and there for improving the compliance culture, moving it from a tick the box to the actual thing which the regulator wants and what the individual investor also expects. But there is, from AMFI side, I can say that there has never been any complaint regarding compliance of the rules set out by SEBI being violated and the investor writing to us. It has not been there. So at least over the last couple of years, we have not seen that sort of a complaint. Most of the complaints that we see are relating to maybe the credit has not happened on a particular day, or the dividend has not received, or his address registration has not happened. Those are the sort of complaints that we see. So I would say overall this industry has high standards for compliance, which is again reflected in the fact that the transparency with which this industry is working is of the highest order. The trust of the investor is key for this industry to grow, which all the AMCs understand, and to that much extent, I think they all work hard to ensure that the investors' trust is always kept at the highest order.
Thank you, Mr. Tesh, for your points of views. Maybe I'll shift gears a little bit to some areas which have been of concern over the last couple of years. We have had couple of incidences in the industry where the burden has come to improve controls we need on the credit side and on the rating side. My question is to you, Mr. Shivaraman. Are you looking at the role of credit rating agencies differently? And since 2018, what are the different steps that you are taking that the industry can rely much more solidly on the assessment being done by rating agencies?
Yeah, the way the ratings have rating business industry has evolved has been largely dependent on the information that's available from the company, the management statements, all of this. Okay. So the lot of the failures, I don't think it has been as a result of any rating related issues alone. Some of these failures have also been magnified to some extent because of the kind of management failures on the ground. Okay. So there are areas of improvement. The oversights can improve significantly. The processes that we put in place on the ground can also be significantly tightened. Frequently, is it a lack of process or lack of conduct, rather the policies within the rating agency, or is it because something has slipped through the hands? Okay, these are things that we need to be conscious about. What has happened within ICRA also is that the process oversights have been significantly tightened and made sure that nothing slips through the gaps. Okay, that's one of the things that has clearly been done, and I'm sure that other rating agencies have also been have got even more conscious about what could perhaps go through the gaps. The failures need not necessarily be attributed only to the rating agencies. Clearly, okay, they are perhaps the most publicly viewed set of people. There are a lot more stakeholders and ultimately who play and it's a cause of the outcome can be multiple reasons, right? It is important that the rating agency from its side does make sure that nothing slips through the gaps. That's the only thing that has happened. And I must also say that the regulations have also changed quite significantly. There have been tighter norms that have been brought about in terms of the segregation between, it was always existing segregation between commercial side and the rating side. All that has happened is that there have been more explicit regulations that have come through on the ground. It's very interesting to see that the way to some extent we can blame the regulators, either RBI or SEBI, to be prescriptive, but some of that may be necessary to allow the market to evolve and build back confidence in what we do on the ground, either as fund managers or as the banks, which financial institutions which lend to the clients, or the rating agencies which rate the exposures to a large extent. But having said that, I must say that over the last 40 plus years, when ratings have been very popular, the CRAs have been one of the most important. I'll typically call them as facilitators, lubrication, of the capital flow across across the industry, from those who have capital to those who need capital. I think their role cannot be minimized. Errors have to be corrected, supervisions have to be tightened, no doubt about it, which is what we need to do.
Enes, you have touched upon a very interesting theme in this discussion, which is the extent of increasing regulation. But I would want to cover a few more aspects in the discussion. But we should talk about more. As we come towards the end of the session, we'll definitely come to that, and I would like to get more views from the panel on how much do we rely on regulation from the regulators, and how much do we get self-aware and drive more self-regulation. I'd request the panel members to have some thought on that.
Over there, I might like to speak more as an investor, okay, rather than as somebody leading a rating agency, because the risks of the investor and the AMCs are not different.
Yeah,
it's exactly the same. Okay, end of the day, so we can discuss about it. Sure.
Yeah. Lakshmi, I would bring focus to you. The regulator has also said that the fund managers should not rely solely on the ratings that are being provided, and you should look at your own internal systems as we look at credit risk. So how has the industry changed the approach towards looking at internal systems while taking investment decisions, especially on the debt side?
Yeah, hi, Mayank. I think this question keeps repeating itself. The English language changes depending on who's the Shakespeare on the other side. I think that's the only difference. But my answer also doesn't change. I just morph different roles on Shakespeare here. If you look at the AMC number 1 to the AMC number 43 or 44, whatever we have in India, show me one fund house which doesn't have a credit research department. That is point number 1. So there is no doubt in the fact that the mutual fund industry is investing enough time and resources. Of course, the degree might vary depending on the size, the scale, etc., and depending on the focus on fixed income, because the needs are quite niche, specifically if you go down the radar on the ranking. But I think there is no doubt about it that there is a very strong case that has, is, and will coexist, where you will superimpose external rating scores, whether it is rating or any other quantitative parameter, to embed that with your own internal research. If I have a flight to take and the Google Maps shows me 20 minutes, and if I try to do exactly 20 minutes, to some extent, the fault is also mine. You can't blame Google entirely. Google is to blame to some extent, but not entirely. So it's a part blame. The role of rating agencies or external rating providers is that of Google Maps. They are a hygiene factor. It is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. So there is no doubt in my mind that the mutual fund industry is reasonably well equipped. The series of events make or create the necessity to tighten the strings where it is required. So when the CM of Maharashtra spoke about 10 days back, he spoke of revisiting certain things based on an observation of the rise in number of cases from certain places, and therefore XYZ measures have been introduced. That doesn't mean that one can be absolutely careless about the entire approach and say that nothing is going to happen. So I think in that analogy, if I bring it into fund management, the mutual fund industry is leaving no stone unturned to ensure that all of these are checked the boxes, because I think it is more than abundantly clear now that risk is the most forgotten four-letter word in good times, and we're not in the best of the times right now.
Thank you, Lakshmi. One more as we move ahead, but before we do that, like you said, at times of crisis, it gives us an opportunity to tighten the risks, and it is the 4-letter word which is forgotten in good times. What should the industry be doing in good times that these interventions, external interventions, are not required? How do we how do we make sure that we build capabilities when we are in the good times, and there's enough attention that is being given, rather than chasing the highs that the industry goes through?
Man, Draupadi was married to the Pandavas, and in the Pandavas you had Arjun, you had Yudhishthir, you had Bhim, and they were all absolutely virtuous in their best. Yet when she was being derobed in public, she required an intervention of Krishna to come and protect her from the hands of the Kauravas. Why I'm giving you this analogy is to just bring to the fore that it is a three-dimensional perspective from risk which is required to ensure that there is very good functioning. It is not that the Pandavas couldn't do anything. It was just circumstantial. It was just at that point in time. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind, that regulations act as a moral police for the entire ecosystem, and it is absolutely necessary, because humans that we all are, there is a tendency to obviously go that extra mile, and that extra mile probably cost you dear. So Yudhishthir is still considered dharm ke prati, but even then obviously he had his weak moments. So I believe that there is a confluence of all these factors which are required. Yes, there is a lot of I would say so for example, let me tell you, there are regulatory checks which ensure that you don't really breach a particular yardstick, but within that there is also additional checks which individual asset managers have put forward. I can talk about obviously in detail what Kotak has done, but that's for another discussion domain. But the fact is that that can be comfortably extrapolated to the rest of the industry. Ultimately, the Lakshman Rekha has to be dual, because the consequences of breaching Lakshman Rekha, whether it was for Sita in Ramayan or for asset managers in the fund management industry, is going to be pretty similar.
Thank you for those analogies, Lakshmi. There is a lot of discussion that has happened on the credit risk side, but we have with us Nilesh, who can give a lot of perspective on the market risk side as well. And Nilesh, my question to you is, the industry, especially on the retail side, has focused a lot on communicating returns, right? And then there is a riskometer. Both are looked at, but both are typically looked at, by the small retail investors separately. Is this a time to combine the two and be really transparent to the investors on risk-adjusted performance?
Yeah, absolutely right, Mayank. I mean, while a lot has been done by the industry in terms of communication, actually the fact remains that all of us know that generally investors look at absolute return or at max relative returns to benchmark and peers, and not many may consider the embedded risk. So the concept of risk-adjusted return, which embeds the underlying risk, while it's been done quite a bit, probably needs a bit more of attention to probably develop a lot of simplified formats. Because as I mentioned, I mean, the fact remains that an average investors neither have time or financial literacy to understand complex risk ratios. And the moment we talk about embedding risk ratios like which may include ratios like Sharpe ratio, Treynolds ratio, Jensen alpha information ratio, drawdown related, all those things. So I think probably what happens is at the end of it, despite the communication, investors probably take a bit of rear view mirror approach, and the channel partners also generally sort of condense thing and highlight past performance. A lot of importance goes at the end to the absolute performance or the absolute number of CAGR performance. And as you rightly said, that probably the entire ecosystem, which is manufacturers, the evaluators, channel partners, and the investors need slightly more sort of efforts so that we understand what goes behind the performance. and incorporate many of the sort of risk measures so that at the end we don't or collectively do not reflect only the absolute performance, but the risk adjusted performance. And this particularly is more true for the evaluators or the channel partners whenever they rate a fund or a fund manager or do a lot of sort of categorization or ranking. Risk adjusted metrics, which is used at many places, more fine tuning on that could really go a long way in terms of communicating to investors.
Bala, wanted to get your views on this. Do you think our channel partners and our retail investors are ready, for a shift like this? There is a solution that is needed. There is always a gap that we can plug in terms of selling the right product to the right customer. But how do we communicate risks? Is this one of the ways in which we can do that more effectively, or is it the revised riskometer, or are there some other thoughts which we should take, and especially keeping in mind the large retail investor base, which is coming into this industry, which is becoming a solid bedrock for the industry to move forward?
Yeah, so I think my own assumption is I think we have now gone to a scenario we are getting ourselves over-regulated in many areas, whether with respect to the transparency or with respect to the boundary you put for the money managers in which he has to operate, which comes in the form of duration in the fixed income schemes. And in the case of equity schemes, it comes a large cap versus mid cap and small cap definition. And it's been very defined, very clearly it has been defined. And there used to be a time where about 3-4 years back, a money managers, what I say as duration of 3 years is very good. Somebody else can say 5 years duration is very good. And both, is known very well that both carry a different kind of risk in interest rate volatile scenario. When interest rate is going down, of course, I can generate higher return if my duration is high. Whereas today, the narrative has got completely changed. If I say as low duration fund and Nilesh is low duration fund, both will have more or less similar duration, but you can't justify 1.5 years low duration and Bala justifies 6 months of low durations. So there has been a very clear definition has been done. So which is nothing but I call it as a boundary. So one of the way you manage your risk, you put a boundary for yourself and everything that you do on the portfolio constructions. And that boundary has been communicated uniformly by all the players in the industry, irrespective of who offer this product. The communication has become extremely clear. So I would probably say this actually, in fact, has taken away the freedom where the money managers can use it actually as part of their own individual ability to generate the extra return. Now he cannot actually make an effort, he has to operate within the boundary. So that's something is my view is very good. Second, I think we also done in the riskometer. The riskometer, we could have easily gone away from riskometer saying it's not understood, therefore let us introduce a new thing, something new. The very fact that the riskometer which has been introduced has been retained, and within that further refinement has been done, itself means that educating distributors and investors are becoming as a part of that. I'll give you one simple example. There used to be a time where all of us used to go and make a representation. Even I was the AMFI chairman, part of the MF Advisory Council. We used to constantly harp on one thing. The moment I go and tell the investors mutual fund subject to market risk, he runs away. Therefore, can we change the narrative from mutual fund subject to market risk? Say mutual funds NAV will remain volatile. We just want to move from subject to market risk. Can we say it will be volatile in line with the market? And regulator, of course, thought through the whole stuff and then said nothing doing, let it be as it is. Today, in fact, nobody comes and makes an assumption, a representation that because mutual funds saying subject to market, therefore I'll not come and buy the instrument. And the same argument that we had once on credit opportunities fund. All of us used to call it credit opportunities fund. Obviously, we as a developer and manufacturer, we need to bat for ourselves, and also what could actually sell to the customers. And we had a representation on the SEBI and then said this is a credit opportunities fund. One member suggested, like, how can it can be credit opportunities? It's a credit risk fund. And we had a multiple round of discussion. I'm looking at opportunity as a spread. The higher the spread is an opportunity for the investors, whereas somebody else sees the risk. Is it right? Then finally, we all agreed for credit risk fund. We actually moved away opportunities and called it credit risk fund. Therefore, if you look at from an investor's point of view, lots of refinement has happened. lots of boundary has been set, and money managers today operating in a boundary. On the contrary, the money managers will probably have more constraints in operating, and that communication now is very well understood from investors. At the end of the day, as the market develops, as it evolves, as it becomes matured, and I would assume even investors will probably start, as I mentioned about mutual fund subject to market risk today, nobody asked about the question. A similar evolution will also happen for the fixed income, and especially in a falling interest rate scenario, and the banks are driving away the depositors to put money in deposits at a higher rate of interest by offering a lower rate of interest. I would assume mutual fund fixed income schemes would become soon a retail product as well.
All right. While we are on the topic of investors, NS, you had made a point about your view as an investor, and especially on whether to the investor the right products are being marketed, which are in line with the risk appetites, risk profiles of the customer. How can the industry strengthen that, and would you like to share your experiences?
Yeah. I'll start as an investor and then maybe suggest also what a credit rating agency can do in this segment. So we have an investor who invests 1 lakh. We see another investor investing at 10 crore rupees in the same fund. Okay, I think largely people understand the risks of investing in a equity mutual fund, very clear equity schemes. Whereas the same thing is not understood so well when somebody comes and makes an investment in the fixed income side. Clearly, the challenge is that we are converting an investor who is used to having a fixed deposit, an ability to withdraw any time that he wants, fairly assured and very well understood what he will earn. If you look at an investment in a fixed income fund, what are the things that affects really? There is a credit risk, there is a mark-to-market risk. These two are very clearly affecting. The credit risk is a function of whether you are at the higher end of the credit or at the lower end of the credit, or maybe something which is much less understood and rated by people. So we need to, if we want to kind of get more and more retail participants and get them to evolve to understand and make the right call on investments, we should not be marketing all the investments, all the schemes to all the participants in the market. This is my personal view that if there was segregated marketing, it will ensure, in my view, it would have perhaps helped in two things. Reduce the level of mis-selling, because you sell only a AAA fund or a corporate or a GSEC fund only to the retail investors, which mimics his expectations to a large extent, subject only to the yield movement in the market. Okay, that's something which can help in retail investors. Do not permit the small value investors in the credit risk fund where the understanding is limited. He is not going to invest time. Give you a riskometer. It's a composite riskometer, right? It doesn't specify clearly between the principal loss and value loss coming from yield movement, right? So I think that's something which is, in my view, I will encourage the rating industry, rather AMC to mutual fund industry to think through and then get a level of flexible regulations so that the individual skills of managing money, the benefit of that is available to be used rather than, as Bala was saying, that we end up operating in a very narrow band, right? So that's something which I will encourage. As a rating agency, I can only say that the mutual fund industry can engage more with the CRAs as you make the investment, because unlike a specific, say, a credit fund, which is private equity driven or a private or limit, kind of an alternate investment fund kind of a structure, or a bank or a NBFC where underwriting credit is a habit for them. No, I would not expect a mutual fund to be so well. Rather, the rigor that goes into underwriting may not be so significant. Despite Lakshmi said that everybody has got a credit research department. My own personal experience, having seen a mutual fund and also a lending entity, I don't see them to be as well equipped to be able to do a credit analysis. So that's a piece where active engagement should be there. In my view, second, that could also help them is get to do make sure that there's a dual rating so that you get a three-dimensional view, and then you get from the view from the two rating agencies, you get the benefit of the internal credit view as well, and then you kind of triangulate and come down to a decision which is much more acceptable on the ground and well understood in investment. Last but not the least, we must get the riskometer to clearly split the risk between principal loss and the MTM loss. Okay, today that risk is not well understood. Here, I think the CRAs can play a significant independent role to assess whatever factors are required, be it the modified duration, the velocity of trading, ABCD, whatever you want to say. Take all of those factors and work along with the industry to develop independent advice to the investors to talk about what could potentially be your mark-to-market loss or yield loss on the ground. This, I think, will help in educating the investors to understand the components of risk better and work on it. This is my view.
Thanks for sharing, NS. And now, towards Bala and Venkatesh, one question, views from both of you on this aspect that there are certain set of risks that is visible to the investor and exposed to the investor, but there are other latent risks lying within the organization, operational risks, fraud risks, IT cybersecurity risks. How is the industry preparing, and do we see the preparedness well enough on these dimensions?
Yeah, interesting, Mayank. I think if you move away from investment-related risk, there are risks associated with, because we are all moving towards online, and digital platform is now becoming a way of life. There are cybersecurity risks, which of course, as any other organization faced with, we also of course face a similar risk. In this cybersecurity, there are of course a lot of frauds. I think Mr. Venkatesh mentioned about in the past, in the beginning. The lot of fraud risk, we do come across a lot of fraud risk where it gets reported, and that's something we need to of course cope up with that. And given the fact that we need to of course become technologically savvy, at the same time we need to also control any potential risk. At the end of the day, hard-earned money of investors should need to get sufficiently protected from any such cyber-related risk. Second is the regulatory compliance itself. I think especially the last 2-3 years, so many issues are faced by the industry. All of them are getting addressed one by one by way of incremental regulatory changes that was coming in. Therefore, complying with such regulatory changes is also equally must. And sometime it will come, and as a yesterday's basis, sometime it will come on a very short notice. It has to get implemented. That means you need to be prepared, such as recording of conversations when the fund manager has got with dealing with the companies and the incident-related tradings, and all such things also have got a higher associated risk for the business, and also keeping up the reputation of the mutual fund players. And these are something which is coming as a risk. But one good thing with the mutual fund industry, which is what my own experience has been, we know what the industry would go through. And fortunately, AMFI as a body, all of us work very closely in that association of mutual fund industry. And this is one industry, a collaboration, I would say, is one of the highest, especially during a tough time, during risk, when it arises significantly, and the industry come together and look at ways and means of addressing those issues instantaneously in order to give a greater comfort to the market intermediaries as well as the investors, and also the regulators and board of trustees, etc. So that's something I would give full credit to the industry. That is why I think we understand, but this risk will remain always some of the potential risk from monitoring point of view.
Thank you very much, Bala. We are coming towards the end of the panel, last 3 minutes, and maybe I would like to use this opportunity to very quickly recap. I think as we set the context and as we heard from the panelists, a lot of positive movement has happened, over the last couple of decades, and with the crisis situations that have affected the industry over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of positive movement towards higher focus on risk and compliance within the industry. There is higher awareness. There are lower complaints. So all positive trends which are moving in this direction. What I would like to know from all of you, and maybe in a short phrase, what is the one thing that we should do differently, when it comes to managing risks better, right? Or what is one thing that we should improve in this dimension? Just a short phrase from each one of you.
So Mayank, I have one statement to make. One is that there is a very high tendency in general to get carried away by the recency bias. And in that process, you end up going for the overkill. Risk management is good. Excessive risk management can be fatal. So I think it can hit on both sides. In Tamil, there is a saying that, too much of anything good is also harmful for health. बहुत ज़्यादा हो गया तो अमृत भी विष बन जाता है. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind. Yes, risk management comes as an amrut, as a much needed boon to the industry, but please don't strangulate and go for the overkill.
I would say, I will reiterate, mutual funds are subject to market risk. Yet have your confidence of saving your money through the mutual fund for long term. Because the risk is managed through an ongoing basis in managing the money. Therefore, risk is always there, but risk should not drive away the confidence of investing in mutual fund.
I would say, Mayank, that risks are being managed well. Even during the peak credit crisis time, you will see that comparatively, compared to the banking system, the mutual fund industry has managed the risk tremendously well. There's absolutely no doubt regarding that. So risks are being managed well. It's a question of how do we communicate that the risks are being managed well to the investors and other stakeholders. That is what we need to do better.
That's a very important point. Thank you for highlighting.
English, I can speak 5 languages, so I'm happy to help Amphi in that. Don't worry.
Enes and Nilesh.
Yeah, so I would, more from a fund manager point of view, I would say to generally probably be paranoid when the going is good, because typically we see many of the risks surface and the seeds are born when the going is terrific. More from a fund management point of view, some of the parameters like liquidity related, size, capacity related, active share, etc. So probably otherwise the template is sort of has been pretty solid for the industry.
Thank you.
I'll perhaps make 2 points with your permission. One, be discerning in your selling, identify your investors and sell the right risk to them. You will not be able to stop mis-selling because investors also frequently don't listen to the advisor fully. Second is that definitely make sure that investors understand the risk in 2 parts, credit principal risk and return risk.
Thank you very much for all the panelists.
You need to summarize yours, the entire instead of you doing it.
Thank you everyone. This was very delightful conversation with all of you, and hopefully to a much tighter risk and compliance while the industry continues to go on the growth path that it has steadily been over the last many years. Thank you everyone. Over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jha, for steering an engaging panel session on compliance and risk management in the Indian mutual fund industry. It was great to hear insightful comments from esteemed panel members who joined this session. Thanks again, Mr. Balasubramanian, Mr. Sivaraman, Ms. Iyer, Mr. Venkatesh, and Mr. Surana.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure to invite Mr. Manish Gunwani, the Chief Investment Officer, Equity Investments from Nippon India Mutual Fund, to moderate the next panel session. is setting gold standards for investment performance. Mr. Gunwani, inviting you to start your panel.
Thank you, everyone. Delighted to be here. I'm sure we'll have a very interesting discussion around setting gold standards for investment performance. Let me start with a very brief introduction to the panelists. First up is someone whom I've had the privilege of working with, Shankaran Naren. Naren is the ED and CIO at ICICI Prudential AMC, and he's had a long innings there, joining the organization in 2004. All of us who follow investment know him as a very strong value and contrarian investor. So welcome, Naren.
Hi.
Our next panelist is someone with lots of experience who's changed jobs recently. Navneet Munot just joined HDFC AMC as MD and CEO. Earlier, he was with SBI MF and was instrumental in scaling up that organization. Welcome, Navneet, to the panel.
Thank you.
All of us are going through a digital transformation. So our next panelist is at the heart of it, Varun Sridhar. He heads Paytm Money, the biggest digital wealth platform in the country. He's worked with banks and was CEO of Finchel India prior to this assignment. Welcome, Varun.
Manish, thank you for the invitation. Pleasure to meet everyone else.
Next panelist is Saurabh Nanavati, an industry veteran. He's been in the asset management industry since 2002. He's right now the head of Invesco India Mutual Fund, and he was earlier with HDFC Standard Life and Deutsche Asset Management. Saurabh, welcome you to the panel.
Yeah, hi.
Finally, we have Ravi Menon. Ravi is the CEO of HSBC Asset Management. He also is part of a committee which looks at HSBC's asset management business in Asia Pac. So I'm sure he has a lot of global insights for us to share. Welcome on board, Ravi.
Thank you very much, Manish. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So let's start the ball rolling. I'll start with Naren. Naren, your thoughts for us active fund managers. Do we have a future or not? We've seen passive attack active investing very violently in the developed markets. How do you see that panning out in India and why?
So if you had periods like 2018 and 2019 till September, I would say that, in all mutual funds, I think the write-off of active management had started. Because if you have 5 stocks doing much better than the remaining 45 in Nifty and small and mid cap underperforming large caps, this was bound to happen. So, the basic thing is that it is not going to be as easy as before. That's period point number. We need a wide doing well, whether it is the FANG stocks in US or in India, the top 5 to 10 stocks doing very well compared to the remaining 40 stocks. So I think we had one of the most difficult periods for active in 2018-19 in September. We should see the situation after October. The situation after October, we had one of the most wide rallies after October. And for that period, I would say that it is very critical that you manage to hold on to your conviction and say that I'm not now going to buy only the top 10 stocks. And that was a challenge, if you ask me, for. So I would say you can't measure active versus passive on a one-year basis. Because on one case, you got a 2% expense ratio. And on the other case, you don't have it. So you are going to take active calls. And if you're not going to take active calls, you might as well be passive. So I believe that we have to be active and you have to take that calls. And as a person with a value contrarian mindset, I have believed in some of my strategies to take really active contrarian value calls. And if you had met me in October or 10th, I would have been crying. But if you look at the situation today, some of those stocks have delivered huge returns. Gives me scope that well, and I still believe in active. But if you're going to measure active on 1 year, you're gone. Because I went back and thought 1999 would have been a very bad year for active. And you've been on the sell side that year, and you know it was that year. 2007 was a very bad year for active. 2018-19 was a very bad period for active till September. So I believe that the second phase of any bull market is very bad for active actually in some respects. And that's why I believe that we have to have a situation where you have to look at active over a long cycle. And the mutual fund industry, the mutual fund distributors, the investors, all have to give us that rope to look at us over a cycle. If they're going to look at us over a very short period of time, then the most steady thing is passive. So I think we have a phenomenal competitor.
If I read you right, you seem to think it's cyclical, and there is that structural argument that the more the money gets institutionalized, alpha basically goes to zero. So you're not of that view yet.
So I think it's nice to take an example like Tesla, which is outside our universe.
Thankfully.
So Tesla went into S&P, and you see what happened after it went into S&P. It went into S&P at 850 and now it is 620. So these kind of things will happen because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, no one is going to think about what happened to it's $800 billion and you're bought at the peak. Whereas I believe that an active fund manager is not going to buy Tesla just because it has entered Nifty S&P 500. And it's easier to talk about Tesla because it's outside my universe. So I think, that's why if you're going to measure, that's why I think there is hope for us. Because finally, at the end of the day today, if you knock off one stock from MSCI or Nifty, if you knock off a stock from MSCI, sometimes the stock falls 20%. So that is an opportunity for me. If a stock gets added to MSCI, and I can tell you there are stocks like energy stocks here which have gone up 20-30% because they got added to MSCI. So there's a lot of hope as passive becomes bigger. There's a lot of room for active, in my opinion.
Sure. Let me move over to Navneet. Navneet, one of the issues which has been talked about is that when we look at the lack of alpha over the recent period, last 3-5 years, is it that customer expectations are not clear for the fund managers? So they are hoarding. There's a lot of group things. When you look at most diversified funds portfolio, the top 5 stocks are broadly the same. So is it that fund managers are not clear to target 1 year, 5 year, 7 year? Is it causing some issues in performance? Your take?
So actually, if we look at the fund performance, there's a fair bit of divergence, which means there isn't a group thing, right? I mean, we have different investment styles, different investment philosophies being pursued by different fund managers. I mean, Naren just talked about his deep value contrarian philosophy versus somebody else who's been following quality and growth. Of course, some of the mega cap stocks would appear in the portfolio. I mean, if you have a large cap fund and the investment universe is 100 stocks, then some of those stocks would appear in most of the portfolios, but you have to look at the active weights and they would be different. And that's why you see the divergence in the fund performance. So, I mean, you look at any time period. Your broader point on short-term expectations, whether they are impacting the fund management or the fund performance, I would say that over the last few years, advisors have worked very hard. I think the industry has worked very hard and investors are now looking at a much longer time frame than putting pressure for delivering the short-term performance. I think investors have a much longer time horizon in mind while investing in equities, so we cannot generalize that. The larger issue of expectations management is very critical, Manish, and I agree with you, because for lasting success in investments, you need patience. I mean, you need discipline and you need a steely resolve. And what can work against you, and Naren talked about the recent period, which was very painful for some of the fund managers. What can work against you is the peer pressure, or maybe the short-term noise, or a media noise, or maybe, of course, your own cognitive biases. And to avoid that, it's important that your people, processes, philosophy, clients, and of course the culture, all of them are completely aligned. If there is no alignment between all of these 5 or 6 things, then of course there would be challenges. Of course, it's easier said than done, but getting these right is the recipe for win-win, both for the fund house as well as the investor on the other side. Because I mean, there can be a it's very difficult to have, when we say consistency in performance. I mean, how can you have consistency in performance every quarter or every year, which means you are plainly following a momentum strategy. You're not a long-term investor. So I mean, you can only have consistency in your process, not in the performance. And I mean, there would be cycles where certain style won't work. There would be cycles where certain styles would work. And that's why I think it's very important that expectations management, I mean, that's a very, very important component of delivering the right experience to the investor. And one point I'll mention, I mean, one of the biggest alpha source, you were asking that question to Shankar, of ETF versus the actively managed fund. I mean, what are the major sources of alpha, or the arbitrage that you are playing to deliver the alpha? I mean, you use your research arbitrage and maybe a time arbitrage. And unless you have that longer horizon where you are willing to live with a underperformance over a shorter term period or even a medium term period, you won't be able to really deliver a performance over a very long time period. And that's why it's important that clients understand that what is the time frame they are looking at while investing in a certain style, and when the when the performance is measured, I think that's looked into. Otherwise, there would always be the another interest. I mean, the related topic would be like the client alpha versus the fund alpha, where fund alpha would be there, but client alpha will be poor because you have entered or exited at the not at the right time, at the wrong time.
Sure, thanks. I'll move on to Varun. Varun, you obviously have seen the digital investor very closely. Are his return expectations very different from a traditional offline investor in terms of returns, time frame, volatility? How are you looking at the investor who comes onto the digital platforms?
So, I'll first up say, I think I'm the least qualified guy on this panel, right? As I listen to everybody else, right? I've never managed a fund of my own, right? But, I come here with the voice of about 7 million retail users, right? And if you look at Paytm Money, we've come in and said direct mutual fund. Now we've come in and said do ETFs, right? And I think I'll talk a bit about from a direct mutual fund versus regular on one side. Then I'll talk about a bit about the digital guy versus the customer who's coming, I don't know, either through an IFA or through a bank, right? And let's start with the first question. I think there's an inherent mis-selling in the commission process, right? And I'll give you a small example. I was in Visakhapatnam, and I was in this really rural place, far away from the city. And I was sitting with somebody who we were just talking about regular and direct. And this person has been investing with this other person in an SIP for 10 odd years. I think he or she was very surprised at why I pay 1% commission to a person whom he's never seen for the last years together, right? And I think there is that whole angle of a physical investor versus a digital one, where the digital one is more aware, first of all, far more challenging, very less loyal. So he or she has everything on his fingertips. Night 2 a.m., you're not delivering 0.5% lower. Your fund doesn't redeem T+1. You have one customer service issue, the customer's gone, right? So from a pure activism perspective, knowledge, ability to challenge, having also been hurt, right? So when you talk to most of these investors, we have two kinds. One is first time to market, and one is absolutely 1000th time to the market. So I have a customer who does 100 rupee SIP, and I have a customer who does actually a 60 lakh SIP, right? So you have both ends, right? Now the second guy is so hurt by everybody that he or she is so aware, right? He's as good as a fund manager. Right? I call him sometimes, sir, aap bata do kya karna hai, right? But he's better off. And I think he goes back to questions. I think there's huge India emerging. And the last segment I would say is the young ones. If you look, I think in the last post-COVID, we launched our equity broking business. And we did this ETF masterclass sometime in December, where we said next 10 years in the industry belongs to ETFs. Because we said India will fundamentally have 30% of AUM coming from ETFs now, as compared to less than 1% for a mass retail customer. what ended up happening, and I'll share with you a very small statistic. Out of my whole equity broking base, 20% now have at least one ETF. And that's between December, Jan, Feb. And as I enter March, I'm starting to wonder that these people are starting to understand passive versus active. They figured out the whole thing to an extent that they start challenging us that why does ICICI Prudential or Nifty Bs have a lower tracking ratio or a different one? So I think the awareness from an investor perspective on digital 100x, which also means that from a performance perspective, the expectations are higher. Yeah, but that would, kind of, I don't know if I answered your question correctly, but that would be my...
Yeah. Is it because your digital customer is more metro-centric, or is it more from the smaller towns? I'm just curious to know that.
Yeah, so 65% of my customers are from B30, actually.
Okay.
So this whole concept of small versus big, rural versus urban, I think is going extremely fast. 50% of my customers are first time to markets, right? So obviously they graduate. I don't think it's that. I think it's the fact that last 1.5 years in COVID, you're on your mobile phone, you're traveling, the Indian transportation system is not improving. So people spend more time in traffic, right? And therefore they're far more accessing and far more demanding. I think the consumer out there is becoming demanding. My median age is 31.
Right. But Varun, just picking up from what Naren and Navneet were talking about, I hope the digital customer, while he's aware, he's not churning funds very fast and giving fund managers enough time to perform.
Yeah, and we should talk about that. I have my personal view on how the AMC business should be structured. Okay, and I'm sure none of them will agree with me, but I think in my mind, I would only launch one fund, one scheme, instant NAV, instant redemption, fixed interest rate. Right now, you say this to SEBI, and honestly, I think our neighboring countries have done it. They have 600 million mutual fund subscribers. Right? Why? Because there's only one button buy and only one button sell. That's it. The problem is, how do I explain a debt mutual fund to somebody? Impossible, right? In the previous panel, somebody was talking about it. I was like, all those words, 99.99% of India doesn't even want to listen. They'll not last through it, right? Let alone go through a mobile screen. So I think the way the AMC business is structured or the fund management business is structured, if you look at what's happened in the capital markets, all that money should have actually gone to the asset managers, right? All the retail, 5-6 million new accounts that have got opened. People are saying, I'll beat the asset manager, which I keep telling them, I said, please don't try that, right? Everything is right now, everybody's an asset manager. I hope, the cycle, when it downturns, we'll see who's a true asset manager. But I think the digital customer is giving time and it's challenging, but we need to educate him properly. That's not happening. We need to simplify significantly. Neither is that happening, right? So obviously then funds would flow.
Sure. I go to Saurabh next. Saurabh, we all know that last few years, the alpha of the industry in aggregate has been patchy. In some cases, been good. In some cases, not been good. Do you see a case for linking a bit of our fees to performance? So you could have a bit of fixed expense along with an element of performance element. What are the challenges you see in the structure? What are the upsides you see in that structure?
So the question is having performance fee in mutual funds?
Yeah, it could be 100%. It could be a mix of slightly fixed expense and a bit related to performance. It could be a hybrid kind of structure.
So look, I think this has been debated globally. In fact, if I go back, I think sometime in 1971, there was a law passed in the US on performance fees. And fundamentally, what the way mutual funds have been positioned, they're supposed to be the first entry vehicle for first-time investors in the capital markets.
Right.
So you should not be ideally going directly because you don't understand the risk, and this should be your first entry vehicle for to the capital markets, right? And if that is the case, then when you start having performance fees, the social case made in the 1970s in the US and Europe was that fund managers will start taking disproportionate risk to get a higher return, and in the process, if it blows up, it will shatter the confidence of the industry and these first-time investors. Another argument was that if you do get performance fee on the upside,
are you willing to lose the performance fee on the downside? So if you underperform, are you going to reduce your risk? And therefore, at this point of time, I think if I go back to some studies, as frequent as, even 2 years back, I think in mutual funds, less than 5% of mutual funds aggregate all across the world have any element of performance fees in a way. They tend to be fixed fees. Having said that, I think in recent times, I have seen, again, this argument coming up in the global markets that with fees coming off to this extent, now there could be a fresh case which should be made for performance fees. And regulators should relook at this. But there have been some acts passed in the US in the 1970s and in Europe in the 1970s to 1990s. That period where in a way they have made performance fees very difficult, especially for the fund industry.
Why is that?
Just because of this asymmetric risk, that on the upside, basically, or the fund manager is going to be incentivized to take higher risk, and in that whole process, if this blows up, it will cause much more structural damage to supposedly a vehicle which should be your first entry point to the capital markets.
Sure. I'll just take Ravi's view on the same issue. Ravi, if you're there, what would be your take on this?
I think as Saurabh just mentioned, it's there only in, I think EU is perhaps the only territory which has got a framework around it. The US permits you, but you have to make it symmetrical. If you gain the upside, you're supposed to, I guess, compensate on the downside. That becomes a very, very good test for no one to offer it. But the interesting thing to observe, and again, to Saurav's point, this is an entry-level investment game. The Indian mutual fund, and I guess pretty much all over the world, is also a deemed very liquid investment. So put a performance fund, a performance fee into a private equity structure with tenor, with duration, it is perhaps justifiable to that extent. But the criticism held against this is in markets, we of course have strict benchmarks imposed by SEBI. But in markets where performance fee do exist, there is a natural tendency to keep very low benchmarks, very easy to beat benchmarks, very difficult for the marketplace to understand how these calculations do take place. And therefore, is this the appropriate time in India to get a performance fee? I think definitely not. We've seen in India, even in private equity, in the years that when you have to pay, people grudge it, and the next year there's a loss, people grudge you even more. So you have definitions of high watermark, etc. So into a marketplace where it's difficult to understand what the fund is, on top of that, bring in a second level of complication on a fee structure, perhaps it's not the most opportune time. And finally, again, referring to the research being done, I think the UK and the EU are once again trying very hard to stop performance fees in the UCITS business. And their view is on the positive side, that the criticism was fund managers will take a riskier portfolio, risk in the fund will increase. That has not been proven to be right. So there's a level of responsibility, but that level of responsibility, if the benchmark is low, then you don't need to take that much of risk. You can still beat it and reward yourself. So it's all of these factors come put together, which I think perhaps it's not warranted at this stage. And in India, the trend, the glide path for fee, we've all experienced much to our discomfort in running a business, is definitely moving in that direction.
Yeah.
So can you imagine the outcry if there's a blowout year, like say this year, and if you were to charge a performance fee, you can imagine the reaction which will be there. So it's best that we stay level to our current decisioning on performance fee being fixed management fee.
Sure, thanks for that. I'll just change tracks a bit, go back to Navneet on something I think he has done a lot of work on, which is ESG investing. Navneet, how do you see ESG investing? Is it input into creating alpha, or is it a way to position a fund and say this is an alternative to performance?
So So there are complexities involved in the way it is defined or followed. To me, I mean, ESG is like a part of value system, a part of like a fiduciary duty to unit holders, or part of your risk management, and maybe a source of alpha. In fact, I would argue that institutional investors together, if they nudge the corporate behavior in the right direction, then it's good for the economy, and actually it's a source of enhancing the beta rather than the alpha. And I mean, you're right that there are complexities involved with what's the right approach. And what we are seeing of late is that a large number of investors are looking at it from a very, very narrow perspective. You have some checklist and you are just ticking the boxes, or you're using a rating agency and take a numerical score to rate a company or buy a stock on that basis. And then again, most of these methodology are like backward looking and not forward looking. And you know it better. I mean, investing is all about looking at change at the margin, or looking at the future prospects of the company. And in a country like India, where we are going through like big transition or a lot of transitions, there I think just applying a more simplistic formula which has been followed in the Western world, I think may not be the right approach. So I think what we are seeing of late is just way too simplistic by some of the fund houses. I mean, any long-term investor will look for sustainable performance and will look beyond financial parameters as well, which I guess I think all the fund managers have been doing. Now, I strongly believe large institutional investors should not vote with their feet. I mean, that's the whole objective of the stewardship code, and some of the sectors which like some of the ESG investors avoid, and that's a way of you launch an ESG fund by saying that we won't invest in some of these sectors. The more simplistic, the better would actually be a proactive engagement with those companies. And as I said, I mean, investors should not vote with their feet. And SEBI has come out with the stewardship code, and I think that will go a long way in nudging all of us towards that. And to me, everybody knows the ESG stands for environmental footprint, social impact, and the governance. I would say the other way to look at it, how to implement ESG is E for engagement, a proactive engagement with your investee company, S for your stewardship. And if you do these two right, then automatically the G would be you help the companies in their journey from good to great.
Great. Let me jump back to Ravi, because you come from a global group. So is ESG a bigger priority for you? Are you adopting it faster?
Yeah, I think for us, clearly as a part of the investment process, ESG is being embedded for as long as ever. As HSBC Group itself, we've been a signatory to PRI and other global formats and templates for a very long period of time. And it's also true that our stakeholders, shareholders hold us to very high standards in maintaining this. So within asset management specifically, if you were to see any of our investment thesis or proposals, it already has an embedded section of ESG. Now, clearly in-country dependency on external data agencies, etc., is improving, but it's still clearly some distance away. But universally, I would say that all of us in this business in India have, in one shape or the other, we have been following this. It's not black and white that it's been a complete variance. But to Navneet's point, clearly the practice historically has been more by exclusion, certain sectors excluded, certain sectors excluded. Whereas this is now truly becoming a far more professional output. For instance, and this is not a commercial plug, but maybe it is, we just launched an NFO day for yesterday, which is our global climate change fund. You could say it's got a tilt on the environmental side, but clearly the SNG is very much there. And if you look through the selection process, which is there, it's fairly robust in terms of being very verifiable. There are external agencies who are all times validating that, and obviously validated then by the internal. But this is like a given. There's no two ways. And in India, the momentum is very strong. SEBI has almost every year by mandate for listed entities been increasing the level of disclosures. And I just see that increasing. So as an industry, it is our responsibility to clearly educate ourselves and inform all our investors and other stakeholders to the extent possible.
But Ravi,
that only benefits us.
Just to kind of be specific, let's say in India you have a ESG fund which is not performing well and a diversified fund which doesn't have so much of a ESG focus doing well. Is it Isn't it very difficult to sell the ESG fund because it's a very retail-oriented market? Do investors in India care anything apart from returns?
Apart from returns, that's a good. So that's a different question altogether as to how funds are sold. I'll give you this recent experience. I'm only day 3 of this MBA. But the concept of climate change is being received so powerfully that that touch and feel is there. That this is something which I feel is important to me as an individual, to the country, to my future, etc. And I think the same thing will have to happen in terms of ESG itself. Otherwise, social governance, etc., are words which people think they get it, but they don't really fully get it. And if they don't get it, then what's the next metric? Return. And returns clearly is the easiest way all of us recognize, and perhaps we ourselves are guilty when we make some of our investment decisions to chase that. But I was thinking about this and I was reminded of this ad which was come, which I think was by Maruti. There's this big group of people, very industrial, very military looking, and there's a presentation going on about some industrial equipment, high-level technical specifications. And the first question which was asked of that presenter, kitna deti hai? Mileage kitna hai? So culturally, we are all the same. We are, kitna deti hai in terms of cost, returns milega in terms of return. So that's the good. We have to recognize that what is happening. And I think, again, in the previous panel, people said, by the time you speak of ratios and volatility and risk adjustment, let's face it, even the people who are well educated don't have the time to sit down and benchmark. Again, it's back to us, back to our discussion, to do it. To a great extent, I think we are doing it by virtue of consistency over time, 3 years, 5 years. It will give you a pretty good indication of cycles and returns. And over that cycle, if there is performance, clearly we visit. And we are seeing that performance is being rewarded in our industry. So yes, returns will stay supreme, but some of the other factors are coming in. And that ESG will be absolutely a critical, necessary condition to qualify to get into anyone's.
Sure. Let me jump back to Naren. Naren, you had one of India's largest AMCs, very big equity AUM. How do you see size as a factor in performance? What all are you doing to make sure that at that size also alpha can be generated?
See, actually, if you look at it, we are seeing new products like, for example, realized when you were there also that if create products which the markets go down and sell when the markets go up, it's much easier to manage money. And we launched a Balanced Advantage Fund, which today has become 30,000 crores. Frankly, last March, even if it was 50,000 crores, we could have bought as much as we wanted. Even if it was 1 lakh crore, we could have bought as much as we wanted. So what we did was we created that kind of a strategy which allows us to buy in periods like Feb, March last year. So size became less of an issue. Second is that, you think of new concepts. Like, for example, we looked at macro and realized that people in India believe micro alone leads to returns. So we created a category called business cycle because I realized that macro plays such a big role. So we launched a business cycle kind of fund, and that did get good response. Actually, we even have popularized a fund of fund category where we invest in other funds. We invest in other schemes of other AMCs as well. And there are schemes of other AMCs where we must be the biggest investor. And that has happened because of the fact that, we felt that in which we can use the schemes that have been created by other AMCs also and we invest in them. So frankly, scale is not a problem at all, but you'll have to keep thinking innovatively on product side. And once we have created this fund of fund bouquet, the entire product suite of all the AMCs are also available for us to look at. And we have invested in possibly at least 5 other AMCs in their products as well. So that's a kind of thing. And we have to keep on thinking. I think we are far away from that barrier at this point of time. And I don't see a problem at the moment. Maybe 3 years, 5 years later, we would be in a different situation.
Yeah, let me get a view of Saurabh on this. Saurabh, what we've seen until this value rally happened, maybe, is that the top 4 or 5 houses by AUM were actually underperforming, and there was a set of 3 to 5 mid-size AUM houses which did very well. So do you think size has a role in this? And how are you ensuring that your house's performance doesn't get hit if the size increases exponentially?
Look, I think if you need to build a larger platform with multiple products, I think it's really important to have a investment process in place, which can sustain you over a longer period of time. So I think there is no process which is right or wrong. As long as you follow the process, it will give you the results over a period of time. As a fund house, we firmly believe on the investment process side as compared with, say, staff fund managers, because it is much more durable and lasts over a longer period of time. I have seen classic examples of fund managers changing in the industry, and a new fund manager comes and changes 60%, 70% of the portfolio in 1 month. And how do you then go back and answer the client that, look, I had invested when somebody else was there, and a new guy has come with a completely different theme, and in 1 month he basically churns 60% of the portfolio. So I definitely feel that investment process is critical if we need to build a fund platform with multiple products. Regarding your question on large and mid-size AMCs, I would rather put it as large and mid-size fund sizes. Look, Naren can have launch a new fund, a small fund starting from zero, and he can generate the alpha, right? And I, as a mid-size asset manager, may reach size in one of my funds, and because of just that sheer size, we all know that Indian markets aren't that liquid in mid and small cap buckets. So once you reach particular size levels in those kind of funds, it's perhaps better to restrict new inflows and be true to yourself that if your objective is to meaningfully deliver alpha, then you need to restrict size. If your objective is to basically hug the benchmark and be along with it, then keep it open, and then let not that size question come into play. So I would put it across in that fashion rather than a mid-size AMC versus a large AMC. It's got to do more with that particular fund size and what's the kind of liquidity in the markets in those categories.
Great. I'll go back to Varun, probably the last question for the panel. Varun, how do you think of active versus passive for the digital platform concept, in the sense that if active funds deliver a lot of alpha, do you think it will enable digital platforms to help penetrate the industry for the next 20-30 crore kind of subscribers, which all of us aspire to get them into the MF platform? Or is it that whether it's digital, whether it's active or passive, you guys will anyway do it using passive?
Yeah, no, I think we will anyway never do it ourselves. We'll do it together. One of the reasons I love AMF is at least we're able to have a great conversation every single time. To back to your question, I think active or passive, in our opinion, doesn't matter, because the things from a digital platform perspective we need to do is almost be very transparent to the market of whatever is available. But then the problem is problem of choice, which means that from a customer perspective, how do you solve problem of choice? So let me give you an example. One of the important things that changed recently was the RIA regulation. Now, we are a direct mutual fund provider, and unfortunately, I can't use MFD, so I use my RIA code. Because I use my RIA code, if I'm a robo-advisor, it's considered as an advisor. Right? Now, ideally, what a digital platform should be doing is to be able to filter the noise. right? To be able to say, hey, dear customer, this is your risk appetite. Can I simplify things for you and tell you one or two things? But the same even asset manager can do. Right now, if I go to a small town or if I go to a new investor or somebody who's let's say not deeply digital, for him or her, the language that we talk, which is English, doesn't work for many of them. Right? If you read the way we are structured, it doesn't work. If you look at transparency of the industry, like is it possible to have a quarterly meet with the fund manager where he or she explains what he's doing? It doesn't happen. Can it happen on a video platform where the fund manager comes out and is transparent? Doesn't happen. Is the fee communication of regular versus direct transparent? I don't think it is. 80% people still don't get it. Right? And so if you start looking at all those things, I think it doesn't matter whether it is active or passive. But once an investor starts to know, I think they're able to make those choices. So as a digital platform, I think we will go for the next 100 billion because we truly think that's the industry. Like we think the capital markets in India need to expand, and the best way to do it is mutual funds. Within mutual funds, is ETFs going to rule? Are index funds going to come up? Will the debt fund industry or the liquid fund industry actually become simple? Right? Like let's take an example. The liquid fund industry has a fundamental problem today that we charge exit load for less than 7 days. Great rule implemented during a crisis for HNI users. Somebody's putting $500. Obviously, एक percentage charge करो. By the time I explain that to him, he's gone. He's like, dude, this is too complex for me. So somewhere, I don't think it's only active, which is passive, but it's also, it's not so much about the return, but about the simplicity. So yeah, but I think the market, digital platforms like us are going to penetrate. Today, I'm proud to say we have one customer from 99%. We are able to do it with our existing MC partners. They have been extremely responsive. Right? Saying, okay, Varun, let's think differently about the whole sector. Maybe 5 years we'll lose money. But are we willing to then say, and I lose a lot of money in this business, but are we then willing to say that 10 years from today, 5 years from today, we'll add those 60, 70 million users? So that starts to happen, but I think the question is not active versus passive. I think the question is how do you do it?
And if there's one regulation or one requirement you have to get to this next 100 million users, what will that be?
I would say please allow AMCs, we have some fantastic fund managers, to launch a fixed interest / fixed payout, a low one. Okay, I don't need 20% payout. User actually asks you something very simple. Can I get a liquid fund where I don't do all this NAV nonsense, and can I get 5%? If you're able to do that, instant credit, instant payout, and the fund industry can say, can I buy my burger using a QR code using a liquid fund? The day this industry comes together and offers that simple product, Paytm will sign up 100 million users. We should use them to farm. Then we should use them to educate. Then we should use them to advance them. The problem is the first product we want the user to take is an equity mutual fund. The second product we want him to take is a debt fund, and the third one is a liquid fund. That's how the industry is organized. When if we talk about retail investors, hopefully it should be the opposite. Right? My dad always used to say, hey, Varun, before you go to the ocean and do deep sea diving, at least have you ever put your head inside a bathtub and seen, are you able to manage suffocation?
Right. Well, on that very encouraging note, we'll have to stop. With a panel like this, we can go on for hours and hours. Unfortunately, we have time restriction. We've reached 6 o'clock, so I'll hand it back to the CII folks.
Thank you, Manish.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Gunwani.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Naren. Thank you, Mr. Manu, Sridhar, Mr. Nanavati, and Mr. Menon. It was really a full session, and we really learned a lot of things, and it was quite interesting also to know about, the investment performances, the standards. Yeah. With that note, let me call Mr. Sundeep Sikka, Chairman for CII Mutual Fund Summit, to do the closing remarks. Mr. Sikka.
Thanks, Rajiv. It was great listening to the last panel. I wish it continued for some more time, but I think we have to come to an end now. So, dear CII members and friends from the fraternity, good evening. It was an insightful 4-hour virtual meet, and we heard industry leaders speak and share their commentaries on creating a growth imperative for inclusive strategy and adoption of technology for the mutual fund sector to explore the real power of analytics, improve compliances, and reduce cost. We also discussed how as an industry, we could ensure sustainability of asset performance, deliberated on the measures we must take to avoid bad performance. The economic and the social disruptions triggered by COVID-19 put the growth of the Indian mutual fund industry under pressure. The long-term outlook was also under stress with the downward fees, reducing profit margins, and changing investor preferences. The industry, along with the regulators and stakeholders, have rethought policies, forecast, and expectations for the near and the mid-term future to improve the position and accelerate the sector's growth. Today's session at 15th edition CII Mutual Fund Summit has brought together clearly the clarity that how to take the sector to the next level, how do you embrace technology, and how do we transform things. I think for me personally, the first session where Mr. Damodaran talked about how do we have inclusive growth, I think was the most touching thing. I think while we need to grow, it has to be inclusive and responsible growth. Also, he touched upon we need to continue focusing on going to the base of the pyramid. While there has always been focus on bigger cities, HNIs, but there's a need for us to go down. Then after that, the second session again was very insightful. I think there is a Dharavi in every Mumbai. I think it's not about only B30 cities. We need to go to the smaller cities. But at the same time, within the bigger cities also, there's need for us to go into the smaller, the locations equivalent to Dharavis. Post that, I think the digital technology, I think that was one of the most insightful sessions where I think Nitin mentioned 90% of the investors, the onboarding is happening online. The last session, we had Paytm talk about 65 of the investors are coming from B30 cities. So I think we are clearly seeing how technology is changing, not only the distribution reach, but also is going to transform the way we manage funds, operationalize, analytics, and various other things. And also to highlight the panel number 3, tighter compliance and risk management. Asset management is all about risk management. And I liked when Lakshmi mentioned, I think excess of anything is bad. Not having risk management is also bad. And having too much risk management can also lead to problems. So I think we need to find that right balance. And the last session was interesting, where I think Manish started by asking whether the active fund managers have a job. But I think I can say I wish that session had continued for another 1 or 2 hours. But I think the conclusion will never come out. I think both active and passive will coexist for a long period of time. So as I conclude, I thank all the speakers, panel members, moderators for bringing national global perspective from the mutual fund sector and varied industries to the discussion and deliberating on the radical steps to invest in building the future of the Indian mutual fund industry. My closing remarks will be incomplete without thanking all the summit partners, mutual fund advisory forum members for their support, and industry colleagues who are attending the virtual session. The 15th edition CII Mutual Fund Summit concludes here, and we look forward to your support and for all future initiatives going forward. Thank you very much, and good evening to all.
Thank you, Mr. Sikka. Thank you to everyone. Now we'll see each other at the 16th Mutual Fund CII Summit. Good day and goodbye.